Welcome to the Fantasy Audiobook. Marvel, YLS It Invincible. Chapter 1. In the industrial area of New York in 1943, Lin Fan was handling goods on the dock. In fact, we should not call him Lin Fan now, but should call him Robert White. The great United States has pushed the battlefield to the doorstep of the Nazis. Now it is in urgent need of the power of young people to help the country save people all over the world as soon as possible. If you happen to be a young person, please come and join the army. The propaganda truck drove past Lin Fan, or now Robert, who in his previous life was a young man of the new era who was deeply baptized by socialist ideas. Even though I don't know how I traveled to the World War II period and lost my identity as a Chinese, I traveled through time and became a blonde and blue-eyed Germanic American. Although he has lost his identity as a citizen of his original motherland, in the 5 years since Lin Fan traveled to the United States, he has never thought of dedicating even a single cent to the freedom and democracy of the United States, let alone helping him. It's time to go to war. Hey, boy, I think you should join the army and go to the battlefield to kill German Nazis like your peers. I think if I were you, I would definitely do this, instead of cowering on the dock like you are now doing the work that you will still have the strength to do in the future when you are 40 or 50 years old. Am I right? As soon as the recruitment propaganda truck drove away from Lin Fan, or Robert as he was now familiar, the persuasion of those older May people who were deeply baptized in liberal democratic ideas rang around him. Before Robert could speak, someone echoed, "I fully support what he said." Listen to me, Robert. I don't know what you are afraid of, but we all know that if you go to the battlefield with your ability, you will definitely shine. I think the people of the world need you. Before he finished speaking, Robert felt that he would be annoyed to death if he didn't speak, so he simply used the ultimate move he had used in the past 2 years. Robert, Charlie and Uncle Hayden, thank you for your kindness, but I have heat asthma, remember. That alone disqualifies me. Charlie, who was a bit fat at first, shrugged his shoulders. Recalling the speed at which Robert usually worked, he said sarcastically, "Usually you don't look like a heat asthma patient. If a person can easily carry 150 pounds of goods, if I were a patient, then I feel like I would be a dying patient." Robert stood indifferently and listened to Charlie's ridicule. In the end, he just smiled back and walked away without fighting back. The reason for this is that Robert knows that Uncle Charlie is doing it for his own good. After all, in the minds of almost all ordinary Americans, being a soldier is the most promising option. Although there is a possibility of death in battle, the reward if you survive is worth it. Called rich. The work of a dockworker is completely incomparable to that of a soldier, both in terms of income and social status. And Robert now works as a dockworker at a young age, which is the same as a young man with sound limbs and normal brain development working as a security guard in the 21st century. It will arouse the incomprehension of a group of people and the hatred of his relatives. Charlie originally wanted to catch up to Robert when he saw him walking away, but his arm was suddenly pulled by someone. Hayden, who was familiar with him, shook his head and signaled him not to talk about this topic for the time being. Why, to be honest, it has been 5 years since Lin Fan traveled back in time to Robert when he was a child. During these 5 years, he has been baptized by liberal democratic culture almost every day. If he had not understood the dirty true face of May country in the future, he might have long been assimilated by this thought. However, the May country in later generations is dirty, but it does not mean that the May country in 1942, especially its people, was as dirty as it was. In fact, most people in the May country still believe in the beliefs of their country. They also believe that the United States is the hope to save the world, and joining the U.S. military is the way to achieve that hope. Robert lived among such a group of people, and to be honest, it was a bit uncomfortable. Maybe it's time to find a chance to leave. With the corner of his eye, he glanced at Charlie and Hayden behind him. Robert thought in his heart that he already had the address he wanted to reach, which was a place he was once familiar with. But now there is a thorny issue that makes him feel troublesome. He has parents after crossing over, and they are pretty good to him. As a flesh and blood person, Robert has been getting along with him for such a long time. It would be false to say that he has no feelings, but he really doesn't want to stay in New York. The ubiquitous recruitment advertisements, Uncle Sam's distant finger and the persuasion of acquaintances around him all made him feel stressed. It's not like Robert never thought about causing a dock accident and then sneaking away quietly, but he just thought about it and didn't take action. What you need to know is that current dock workers do not have accident insurance. If they die in an accident, don't expect much compensation from the capitalists, and the government will not provide support to the workers' families. But if a U.S. soldier is killed in action, not only will he receive a generous pension, but the family members of the U.S. soldier who died in action will receive state subsidies every year. Now Robert lacks a reason. After all, just for these reasons, it is not worth letting him go to the battlefield to serve the United States, because he is familiar with some history, but he knows that this war is about to come to an end. Then after the victory of Mio, people around you will be less critical. Robert shook his head secretly. Even though he knew the answer to the matter might not be good, he didn't have much choice right now. Robert, who was originally immersed in pessimistic fantasies about the future, suddenly twitched his ears, and his extraordinary reaction ability made him jump away instantly. Bang! As soon as they jumped away, a person flew up from the water and was hit hard on the ground. Before Robert could figure out the situation, another person quickly climbed up the ladder from the water to the land. After this, the people who came out of the water started fighting in front of Robert. The first person who flew out and hit the ground took out a knife and slashed hard at the other person. This knife was very sharp. Based on Robert's extraordinary reaction speed, it seemed that ordinary people would be injured or even killed on the spot by this knife. However, the unexpected result was that the extremely sharp knife was easily dodged. Robert looked familiar when he came up the ladder, but he still couldn't remember where he had seen this 190 centimeters tall man with strong muscles all over his body. It should be easy to remember this kind of person, why can't I remember him? The two of them struggled together and did not disturb Robert's thoughts. It was not until something flew out of one of them's arms that it hit the ground and broke into pieces. Ding bell. With a sound, a blue test tube shattered at Robert's feet. He actually had the ability to prevent the test tube from falling to the ground, but this scene was so familiar that he was distracted and missed the opportunity. This is. Driven by curiosity, Robert squatted down and touched the blue liquid that had not yet finished drying. Suddenly, a string of blue subtitles appeared in front of his eyes. Available ability detected. Super serum makes the user's physical fitness reach that of the human body. Extreme things and people. Can I obtain the ability of super serum? Robert was a little confused when he looked at the subtitles in front of him, because in the 21st century, he had never heard of such a thing appearing in reality. There might only be one place where it appeared. Steve, who are you? I'm just the first. Cut off one head and two new ones will grow. The familiar yet unfamiliar conversation rang in his ears. Robert was stunned, and then a glimmer of light flashed in his eyes. He accepted the ability of the super serum without any hesitation. He now had a new goal. Steve Rogers was still standing there feeling his newfound strength. Robert took this opportunity to leave from the side. When passing by Charlie and Hayden, Robert, who had already made up his mind, asked them one last favor. Charlie, Uncle Hayden, I have changed my mind. Life is still full of dangers. For the people of the United States, I decided to join the army and fight the Nazis. Now please tell your boss that I am quitting this job, but my wages for the past few days cannot be reduced at all. After Robert said seriously, he went to the back room to change into clean clothes, leaving the two people in a daze. It wasn't until Robert walked away that the two of them realized. Charlie, this kid finally figured it out. The Nazis will soon face their nightmare. Hayden, Robert's ability is beyond doubt. I have always believed that the battlefield is the most suitable place for him. I originally thought it would take some time to get him there, but I didn't expect it to be so quick. Charlie, young people are always full of enthusiasm. He shrugged and continued. I think today is a memorable day. How about I treat you to Futch's bar? Hayden, that's a nice offer. There are recruiting offices everywhere in New York City. Robert randomly picked one and walked in. He was originally 1.87 meters tall and seemed thin, but after taking off his clothes, normal people would understand the full muscles. It is a symbol of strength. Robert, your physical examination report is out. Your body is very strong, both externally and internally. The nurse who handed over the medical examination form had a peach blossom look on her face, and everyone could understand the look she glanced at Robert from time to time. Although he has never had a girlfriend and has little experience in getting along with strange women, this does not prevent Robert from being self-taught now. I think the doctor hasn't arrived in some places yet. So, this beautiful nurse, would you like to check me out again? Happy to oblige. Now Robert was wearing shorts because he had just completed his physical examination, and the nurse in front of him hugged him directly after getting his reply. The breeze blows, and a pleasant sound seems to come from time to time in a lounge, but it seems like there is nothing, everything is unspeakable. A U.S. military camp far away from the center of New York City, Robert was sent here in the evening. He was supposed to arrive in the morning but was delayed due to some special reasons. Being thrown alone at the gate of the military camp, Robert could only take his ID alone to find his unit that should be in place, the 116th Regiment. Looks like I have to find a way to get into the 107th Regiment. After meeting the Super Serum and Steve himself, Robert already knew that he had traveled through the Marvel world, and as a time traveler, he had a gold finger. And he has 10 ability boxes, which are similar to skill boxes. They are all blank in their initial state. The method used is that Robert touches the things that want to gain their power. Just like the 3 abilities he already has, Human Limit was obtained by touching the Super Serum, and the other 2, Giant Power and Sensitive Sensibility, were obtained from elephants and Sensitive Senses by Robert in the zoo before. Ability gained from the tiger. If in a normal world, Robert's ability obtained from animals would be enough for him to live a life of ease, but unfortunately this is the Marvel Universe and Robert's power can only be used as cannon fodder at best. You have to make good use of the remaining ability slots. Looking inside his 7 empty ability boxes, Robert already had an idea. After all, the most powerful things in the Marvel Universe are only the 6 Infinity Stones. Only by gaining their power can one survive in this dangerous world. It is worth noting that Robert can only randomly obtain one type of ability on the same thing. Once the ability is obtained, it cannot be obtained on this thing again, and the ability cannot be deleted once it is obtained. This also explains why Robert doesn't live in the zoo and touch animals every day to gain special abilities. Very well, recruit, you are nearly 11 hours late, so what answer do you want to give me? As soon as he reached the door of his camp, Robert was stopped by a man with the rank of sergeant. Under the roof, Robert could only answer in a formal manner, I am late to report to the commander because of my own reasons. I feel guilty about this and am willing to bear any punishment. The sergeant who blocked the door said, Did I hear you correctly? You said any punishment. Robert, you heard me right, sir, I am willing to pay the price for my stupid behavior. Although Robert could hit 10 sergeants in front of him with one hand now, he didn't want to cause trouble. The sergeant seemed very satisfied with Robert's answer, so he stepped out of a position and put him in. Have a good rest, recruit, and you will fulfill your promise tomorrow. The sergeant said from behind after Robert took a few steps. Robert himself didn't care about this, because he could no longer be regarded as an ordinary person. For new recruits, the hard training was just playing house for him. After all, the ability of Power Elephant Fighting allows it to use the peak strength of an adult male elephant. The Sensitive Senses give him the reaction ability of a tiger. Even Robert's once weak internal organs and self-repair ability have been improved by the Human Limit ability. It can be said that Robert is now beyond normal people, and even the enhanced Steve Rogers, also known as Captain America, cannot compare with him. Hey, look, the person who made us suffer is finally here. Let me see who caused us to be left alone for extra training. As soon as Robert entered the tent in the rest area, he was surrounded by several people. They smelled strongly of sweat and looked at Robert, who had just entered, with unkind eyes. Is it you who prevented us from seeing a welcoming ceremony for new recruits composed of beautiful ladies? Just because of the collective honor. This is a tent where 10 people live. Now, except for Robert and the 5 people surrounding him, the other 4 are sitting on the bed watching the show. I'm very sorry. If you're talking about being late, I think it should be me. Go back and explain to your mother. Before Robert could finish his words, he saw the strongest muscular man among the 5 punching him. To be honest, he felt guilty at first and wanted to explain, but now that he was attacked, he wouldn't be like a turtle. Just endure it. Raising one hand to easily catch the punch from the muscular man, Robert gave them one last chance and said, "If you stop now, I might consider talking to you as nicely as I did just now." Let's go together. Robert's move did briefly surprise the 5 people who originally wanted to teach him a lesson, but when they reacted they did not hesitate to start implementing the plan they had already made. After all, they were ignorant and thought that Robert's current strength was not enough. Make them feel intimidated. 5 seconds later. Except for the muscular man who was the strongest and was the first to strike, the rest of them were all knocked out after Robert gave them a blow, fell to the ground and fainted. Oops. Because Robert had not yet fully adapted to the newly acquired strength that reaches the limit of the human body, this time he only wanted to teach these people a lesson, which made them almost go to see God. What happened here? The person in the tent who was knocked out by Robert happened to be discovered by the patrolling soldiers. When they checked the situation and found that the new recruits who had joined the battalion flew out and fainted, the patrolling U.S. troops immediately increased their vigilance and quickly loaded their weapons. People inside, listen and come out immediately with your hands on your head, or we will shoot. Tough luck, Robert cursed in his mind. To be honest, he now regretted being crazy with that nurse for so long, but after all, it was his first time and it was normal for him to be tempted. In the recruit camp, Colonel Philip, who received the order to go to London, England, to fight against the Nazis tomorrow, was lamenting about the last regiment he accepted, the 115th Regiment. "Philip, I don't know how effective a group of dolls who have only been trained for half a month can be on the battlefield." His words left the subordinates around him and the commanders of the camp speechless, because they all knew the fate of these soldiers who went to the battlefield before they had been trained for a long time. Report. At this moment, an announcement sounded outside the command room. As the person with the highest official position at the site, Philip naturally became the leader here. "Come in." Unexpectedly, the second lieutenant just gave him a salute and then went to report to his camp commander, Lieutenant Colonel Dart. Colonel Philip, who felt that he had been ignored, said dissatisfied, "Listen, Lieutenant, there are no outsiders here. If you have anything to say, you can say it out loud." Lieutenant Colonel Dart and the top commander of this new military camp, although he was very satisfied with the performance of his second lieutenant, in his heart, he could not show it on his face. Instead, he said with a smile, "Yes, second lieutenant, you can report it loudly, there are no outsiders here." "Second lieutenant, it's sir. There was a fight in our camp just now." Before he finished speaking, Philip interrupted, "Just for this matter. I think you may have the ability to solve it." Seemingly sensing the colonel's neglect, the second lieutenant spoke again. "Sorry, sir, I didn't mention just now that the perpetrator knocked 5 people away with his bare hands in less than 10 seconds, 4 of them were unconscious and 1 was injured. Wide awake." What? Philip subconsciously thought this was a joke. You must know that the recruitment of the U.S. military is strictly inspected and tested to ensure that every recruited soldier is an adult and strong male. However, 4 of the 5 young and strong men were knocked unconscious within 10 seconds, and 1 was awake but unable to stand up. This is too ridiculous. Bring the perpetrator here and I want to see if he is a human or a ghost. Robert was escorted in front of Philip with handcuffs on his hands. However, when he saw Robert's figure clearly, he sneered at how easily he could overturn 5 people. "Philip, so it was you who defeated 5 people with your bare hands. What was it about your body that was so thin that no muscles were visible, or your stubborn will?" Perhaps it was the previous neglect that made the arrogant colonel a little emotional. He now felt that he had been deceived and fooled. The root of everything was just questioning Robert's strength. After seeing this clearly, Robert immediately knew the way to solve the problem, but before that, he had to fight for some benefits that he could only see. Looking at Colonel Philip, who looked down upon him, Robert said, "As you heard, I subdued 5 comrades who wanted to attack me with my bare hands, but I am not proud of this. My strength should appear and kill Nazis on the battlefield instead of fighting with your comrades here." Looking at the new recruit Robert, who was tall but not very fleshy at all, Philip couldn't understand the source of his confidence. Philip's eyes fell on Robert's eyes. He knew that no matter how much he said now, it would seem weak. Only strength can prove everything now. With a touch, Robert easily broke free from the handcuffs in front of Colonel Philip. He did this without using any skills and just relying on pure strength. After a brief period of silence, the scene looked like an explosion. What are you doing? Squat down and raise your hands. No, 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 stand back, recruits. Protect the colonel. Robert, who was very close to Philip, saw a hint of surprise in his eyes, but as a commander who had been on the battlefield, this did not scare him. Looking at Robert, who had not moved since breaking free from the handcuffs, and then looking at the situation that was already in a mess, and even someone had a weapon loaded, Philip had to control the situation. That's enough. What are you panicking about? The person standing in front of me is a conscripted American soldier, not a Nazi. Stop your bad moves. As the person with the highest official position present, Philip's words were very effective and the situation was quickly brought under control. When the scene was quiet, the colonel looked at Robert carefully, and now there was no contempt in his eyes. Philip, if I remember correctly, the thing you were wearing just now was customized by the army and made of pure steel. He tilted his mouth, still looking a little surprised. Robert, really, my strength has been strong since I was a child. After looking Robert up and down, Philip said, maybe. Philip, as you just said, you are only 17 years old and have not received any military training, right? Robert and Philip were walking through the boot camp now, and they were passing a shooting range when he asked the question. Regarding the question posed by Philip just now, Robert answered truthfully, no sir, I have not received training. Philip had already picked up a rifle in his hand. He looked at it for a while and then handed it to Robert. Philip, there is a target 150 meters away, can you see it? Robert looked at the target in the direction he pointed. Even though it was dark now, he could still see clearly with his ability at the limit of his human body. Okay, recruit, as we said when we talked just now, if you can hit the target without any training, you don't need 10 rings to hit it. If you hit it, then I will allow you to go to the battlefield. In the conversation between the two just now, Robert showed a strong willingness to go to the battlefield. Regarding this, Philip subconsciously thought that this was a young man who was capable but arrogant and eager to prove himself. After learning that Robert was just a new recruit, Philip decided to teach him a lesson. Looking at Robert's unfamiliar loading action and his incorrect posture for holding the gun, Philip felt that the lesson he had received would definitely be very successful. When Robert was taking aim, Philip was still beside him and said triumphantly, young man, I think you should understand that you cannot defeat the Nazis simply by relying on brute force. This is no longer the barbaric era. We now rely on guns and cannons. Bang! As soon as he finished speaking, Robert fired immediately. To be honest, if Colonel Philip hadn't been part of his plan, he would have been too lazy to listen to him. 7 rings. As soon as Colonel Philip and his team arrived, the instructors and soldiers at the shooting range had already come out to line up in order. Now, as soon as Robert's results came out, someone would report the target to him. Robert, sir, can I go to the battlefield? His current expression is as earnest as an impatient young man should be. In fact, these are all Robert's disguises. He could have shot 10 rings just now, but the moment he pulled the trigger, his gun body was a little off. Because 7 rings were enough, he didn't want to act too shocking, at least not to be regarded as a monster. When Philip saw the 150-meter target with his own eyes, in order to keep his promise, he had no choice but to say, "It seems so, Corporal Robert." As if to prove that he kept his promise, Philip said to Dart behind him, "Incorporate this boy into the 115th Regiment and go to the European battlefield with the rest of my regiments tomorrow." Dart, "Yes, Colonel." Robert got his wish and was incorporated into the 115th Regiment that was about to go to the battlefield, and became a corporal. After giving the order, Philip gave Robert one last look and left gracefully. A group of officers also dispersed, either going to rest or returning to their unfinished work, and Robert, who stayed where he was also taken to their camp by a second lieutenant of the 115th Regiment. "Second Lieutenant, just stay here for one night. The combat uniform will be delivered to you tomorrow. I wish you a good dream, soldier." After saying that, he patted Robert on the shoulder and left gracefully. After all the trouble just now, it is already 21 o'clock in the evening. The soldiers of the 115th Regiment who have trained all day during the day went to bed early in this military camp with few entertainment projects. With Robert's ability now, it was as easy as eating and drinking to quietly enter the sleeping barracks without disturbing anyone. It wasn't until the people in Robert's barracks woke up the next day that they discovered him belatedly. "Why are you in our camp?" a sergeant asked, staring at Robert. Robert explained to him the whole story, excluding of course the part where he showed off his strength. He only said that he didn't know why he was transferred. After the sergeant went out for verification, Robert's identity was also explained. "Sergeant. Welcome, Corporal Robert. We will be teammates from now on. Now I want to introduce you to the others. This is Macaulay Darcy." He pointed to a person, and Robert extended his hand in a friendly manner and introduced his name to the person. "My name is Robert Betty, hello. This is Henry Devon, Horace Mitchell." After each introduction, it was finally the sergeant's turn. "My name is Cook. Jason will be your commander from now on. Robert Beatty, I will follow your instructions from now on." After the introduction, Robert's neither arrogant nor impetuous behavior won everyone's initial acceptance. "Corporal Robert, your combat uniform and weapons have been delivered." After everyone had just finished the introduction, someone outside called his name. It was the second lieutenant who brought him here yesterday. "Hurry up and put them on, we're about to leave." After handing the things to Robert, the second lieutenant left as casually as ever, without any pleasantries. Robert's current commander, that is, Sergeant Cook, looked at Robert's unfamiliar movements. He first taught Robert and then asked next to him, "So you are still a recruit who has never experienced a day's training?" After receiving Robert's nod of confirmation, Cook couldn't help but remain silent until he finished dressing up before sighing in a very small voice. "Can the Nazis really be defeated?" Sergeant Cook was obviously someone who had been on the battlefield, because the temperament of a person who had killed people was fundamentally different from that of ordinary people. Robert could understand Cook's confusion. After all, although the Nazis were now showing signs of decline, their resistance was still tenacious and they even had advantages on some battlefields. If Robert didn't have the memory of later generations and was placed alone in this era, as a person in the game, he might have the same emotion. "Come on, Corporal, I think I should teach you how to use a gun." Temporarily getting rid of the confusion, Cook said to Robert. "Training begins." After 10 minutes, Robert mastered how to use the current U.S. military rifle, and he was able to aim the gun according to the standard that he was only taught once. "Oh, are you really a new recruit? I feel like you're doing a better job than me," Cook said half-jokingly, but even though it was a joke, one could see how fast Robert was learning. "Assemble." A few minutes later, after Cook and Robert finished talking about some battlefield knowledge, the order to assemble was sounded at the right time. Robert, who had already been fully dressed, followed his comrades out of the barracks. All the soldiers of the 115th Regiment quickly gathered. The soldiers were loaded into the military trucks that had been prepared. They would be taken to the military port and boarded a requisitioned ship or warship. European battlefield. 5 months later, on the European frontline battlefield, the weather was gray and drizzling, and a raindrop fell and hit Robert on the face. At this moment, he was not as clean and tidy as when he first joined the army. Instead, he was covered in mud, and there were even blood stains in some places. 26.32 inches. After going to the battlefield, Robert developed a habit of counting how many rounds of ammunition he had left during his free time on the battlefield. Now he still has 32 bullets on him. The reason why he only has these bullets is not because of insufficient military supplies. It is well known that the U.S. military is notoriously generous in war, and the soldiers on the front line do not worry about ammunition at all. This is also true. When Robert first went to the battlefield, he carried a rifle with a scope, 300 rounds of ammunition, a dagger and 5 grenades. While counting ammunition, Robert suddenly saw a shadow moving slightly in the enemy's position. He raised his gun and fired without hesitation. Bang! With the sound of a gunshot, a splash of blood immediately spattered over there. The sound of the gunshot seemed to ignite the explosive barrel. The German troops on the opposite side who wanted to seize the position began to fire wildly at this place. The fire snakes of rifles, submachine guns, and machine guns seemed to be free of charge. They also attacked Robert's position, but in the end it was useless. At a distance of 500 to 600 meters, the American troops were still hiding in the trenches. To be honest, the German bullets were of no use. Robert took advantage of the weakening local firepower to shoot, and he was able to destroy a high-value target with almost every shot he fired. Now in the German command headquarters opposite the American army, the commander of this German army was throwing a cup and furious. German commander. Asshole. For 2 whole days, our 3 regiments have not been able to break through the defense of one enemy regiment. I need an explanation. Is it true that some of us have betrayed the Führer as rumored? Quote. He stared unkindly at the German officers present. He had been furious for the past 2 days. Originally full of confidence, he led 3 German infantry regiments to fight against an infantry regiment on the opposite side. One of the 3 regiments of the German army is still an elite regiment directly related to him, and intelligence has already shown that the American troops defending the opposite side are just a new regiment that has been trained for less than half a month. For such an opponent, the German commanders originally thought that the battle could be easily ended, but they did not expect that the battle lasted for 2 full days, and the German troops not only failed to make any progress but suffered heavy casualties. Hearing that their commander brought up the subject of betrayal of the Führer again, some people in the German command tent couldn't help but break into a cold sweat, because the last time the commander said this, someone had lost their head. This was especially true for the 2 regiment leaders who were not directly related to the commander. When the 2 of them were caught by his sight, they could not help gritting their teeth decisively. They secretly said, "Fight it," and offered to go to the front line to supervise the battle without being forced. I heard that the Hell messengers from the US military are stationed on the opposite side, so it is so difficult to bite. It was not until the 2 German commanders walked far enough with their cronies that one of them took the lead and said, "Don't scare yourself." After saying this, he didn't know how to deceive himself. After all, the death rate of high-value soldiers such as machine gunners and frontline commanders on the battlefield in the past 2 days was almost ridiculously high. One by one will die. If that's the case, there may be no need to continue this battle. Thinking of this possibility, the German commander directly changed his tone and sighed pessimistically. If we have the assistance of the armored forces, it will be useless no matter what the Hell messengers are. The German commander who just started to speak said bitterly. You and I both know this is impossible. The armored forces have all been led by General Marion to fight the US military. In fact, our 3 regiments were originally an important part of the plan. If we could break through the position on the opposite side within half a day as planned, we could cooperate with General Marion's armored forces to surround the US military. If we succeeded, we might be able to turn the tide of the war. He who was a little pessimistic just now couldn't help but get excited when he said this, but his companion couldn't help pouring cold water on him. But it's been 2 days now. As if he felt that the problem was not enough, he continued, if our troops cannot break through the opposite position, we will bear the responsibility for the failure of this battle regardless of our life or death. If Robert listened to him here, he would definitely tell him that the situation between the 2 of you now belongs to the scapegoat. Give me a group of 5, spread out and charge forward. At the command position on the front line, the German commander, who had been here for 2 hours but had made no achievements, finally couldn't hold himself back. He stopped trying to retain his strength and ordered the soldiers to charge regardless. 18, 16, 9, 5. Following the silent recitation, when the last number was counted, Robert immediately shouted to his side, "I've run out of bullets, and I'm applying to retreat, sir." Major Burns Corey, the commander of the 115th Regiment, immediately accepted Robert's advice. In fact, they had overfulfilled the task of blocking the enemy for a day. Another enemy charge was defeated, and Robert was about to retreat when suddenly he saw a figure more than 1,000 meters away waving vigorously, as if he was arranging a charge in anger. "Wait a minute, Major, I want to ask you to borrow a bullet." Robert made a quick decision and decided to shoot again. Burns Corey, the people on the other side may not have heard of your title of Messenger of Hell, or they are stupid and don't believe in your reputation at all. Obviously he also saw the target 1,000 meters away. According to common sense, the position where the German commander is standing is relatively safe. Unless the enemy is supported by artillery fire, it will be difficult to pose a threat to him, but that is just a normal situation. Bang! With the sound of a gunshot, Robert turned around and signaled to the major that he could leave. He was confident that he had hit the target, and it was true. Looking at the slowly falling figure more than 1,000 meters away, the commander of the 115th Regiment, Burns Corey, said with emotion, "Lieutenant Robert has agreed that you will have to teach me marksmanship after returning this time." "No problem, of course we have to go back to the base and talk about it. The American army is retreating in an orderly manner, but the German army is just watching in place, because just now, Robert sniped and killed a German regiment commander. Now the regiment commander's men can't stand the high pressure of the battlefield and have begun to flee. The messenger of hell is on the other side, run away. The commander is killed, are we still here to die?" Negative remarks one after another fermented among the German army, and many people began to take action. It can be said that except for the most elite of the 3 regiments of the German army, the other 2 regiments have suffered varying degrees of defeat. Robert and the others also took advantage of this opportunity to evacuate safely, not even encountering the expected enemy pursuit. After more than 2 hours of marching, they finally arrived at the rear base camp. "Lieutenant Robert Betty, you have once again created a miracle." As soon as they entered the camp, Philip gave Robert a big hug. There was no reason for him to be unhappy. 2 months ago, he thought he had just found a good talent. However, time told Colonel Philip that he had recruited a peerless genius. After all, which recruit can kill 2,000 to 3,000 enemies within 5 months of being on the battlefield? This is still a statistical data, and there must be many that are not included in the statistics. "Philip, the messenger of hell, the nightmare of the German Nazis, I am proud of you." Philip was not stingy with his words of praise. After all, what colonel could refuse a subordinate who could help him get promoted and become a general of the United States of America? "Thank you for your compliments, sir." In fact, Robert himself was very fond of Colonel Philip. The 2 of them could not be said to be unilaterally exploited, but rather mutual achievements. The proof is the lieutenant rank now hanging on Robert's body. "So sir, where is my next target?" Robert once again asked the question he had asked several times in the past 5 months, like a tireless war machine. When Philip was asked, he was greatly relieved, knowing that just because of the lieutenant in front of him, his promotion proposal was proposed again. According to reliable information from Philip's personal friends, the proposal has passed the voting stage and now only needs to wait for the president's signature to confirm that Colonel Philip will be promoted to Major General. This is almost a certainty. Philip even got an accurate date when his Major General uniform will be delivered on the 1st of next month. "Agatha, our 107th Regiment will have an operation there tomorrow. I thought maybe I could send you there." Speaking of this, Philip paused. He seemed to have thought of something. Robert was about to salute and accept the task, but Philip's pause interrupted him. "Robert, is something wrong, sir?" Philip did not continue to speak this time, but stared at Robert for a long time, seemingly struggling, and then told him the news out of love for Robert. "Philip, do you still remember what you said when you saw me in the 2nd month of going to the battlefield?" When Robert heard this question, he immediately realized something and quickly affirmed, "Yes, sir, I still remember. I made a bet with you that if I could capture the German armored battalion within 3 days, you would help me pay attention to the date when Captain America, my idol, comes to the front line." Seeing that Robert remembered it so clearly, Philip was a little helpless, and he didn't understand. How could Robert Beatty, the messenger of hell, and the nemesis of the Nazis, who was widely rumored among both the German and American troops, admire that guy who only wore the stars and stripes and gave speeches? Philip personally witnessed the birth of Steve Rogers, the Captain America. In his opinion, Captain America was just a lookalike who became famous after being injected with a super serum. He was not worthy of being called a soldier, let alone a captain. However, Robert was different. Philip witnessed his growth with his own eyes. On the battlefield facing the German army, the Nazi nemesis was always able to keenly discover the enemy's flaws, and he could create flaws even if there were no flaws. Just like the armored battalion they bet on, Robert sneaked in alone and beheaded the other party's top commander that night. This caused the opponent to be in chaos and lost his will to fight under Philip's powerful blow, so he was easily captured. It can be said that the current Captain America is only famous in the United States, a peaceful place, relying on speeches and hype. It is unclear whether he will be useful on the battlefield. Robert is the god in the hearts of the U.S. military on the frontline battlefield. As long as he is there, the morale of our army will rise greatly, while the German Nazis will fall into panic. After all, on the battlefield with Robert, his gun will not allow even one high-value target to exist on the opposite side. German commanders, machine gunners, gunners and even ammunition boxes are all his targets. Only the ordinary German soldiers with rifles could be ignored by him and temporarily escaped, but what was the use of that? After all, our US military is not a vegetarian. Known as the rich army, they have plenty of machine guns and artillery. The Nazi army may have lost all the soldiers at the front who had heavy firepower as soon as the fighting started. In the end, the Nazi soldiers even concluded a consensus, that is, where there are messengers of hell on the battlefield, you will not touch machine guns or anything like that. Sir, I think I won't be able to participate in Agatha's battle. You know it's been a long time wish of mine to meet Captain America. Ignoring Philip's confused look, Robert insisted. Seeing his persistence, and in his opinion, there was really no need to use his ace, the Hell Messenger, in Agatha's battle this time. Philip, well, the guy in the Stars and Stripes is coming to our place next week to give a speech. The congressman said it would boost morale. Maybe. Philip finally compromised in front of his beloved general, but before leaving, he still did not forget to express his contempt for Captain America in an arrogant manner. Robert didn't care about this. After all, his plan was to get acquainted with Captain America and strive to follow him in every battle, because Robert knew that only in this way could he have a chance to come into contact with that thing. Tesseract, the storage of the Space Stone. Captain Marvel relies on its little escaping power to become one of the top superheroes in Marvel, so what can it bring to me? Looking at the sun that was about to set on the horizon, Robert licked the corner of his mouth and whispered, I'm really looking forward to it. After returning to the barracks and taking a shower, Robert felt refreshed. Now, as an officer and Colonel Philip's confidant, of course he had a separate tent room. Lying on the bed, Robert habitually checked his ability box. This was his long-standing habit. After confirming that his ability was still there, he closed the floating page that only he could see. Phew, this is finally coming to an end. Exhaling a breath, Robert shook his head and walked out of the tent wearing only shorts. Next week, in 3 days, Captain America will be here. At that time, he will be able to get acquainted with him according to his own plan, and then naturally follow him to fight as his admirer. Then if there are no deviations in the plot, Robert will have the opportunity to touch the Tesseract and randomly obtain an ability from it. In this world where gods exist, Robert feels that only having the most advanced power can ensure his safety. After all, he does not have the halo of the protagonist. If he does not have enough strength, he may become cannon fodder. You can't sleep either. After standing outside for a while, Robert found Major Burns, the leader of the 115th Regiment, walking towards him. Come out and get some air, the night sky is beautiful tonight, isn't it? After he said this, Burns glanced at the sky. In this remote mountainous forest far away from the industrial city, air pollution was almost non-existent, so it was easy to see the stars and the full moon in the sky. It's true, but I think you, the nemesis of the Nazis, are the only one who is in the mood to look at the stars right after the war. Burns was obviously not interested in the stars. Robert just smiled and did not struggle with this issue. He asked, "Oh, then this unmotivated officer, you are not sleeping in the tent, why did you come to me? Is there any reason?" Robert has a good relationship with the Major. If he had enough time, maybe he could become a very good friend with the Major. But Robert has decided to be frozen for 70 years with Captain America because he really doesn't want to miss the 21st century. A few big plays. It's true that something happened. Do you still remember the person you shot with the last shot before you left today? Of course I remember, you can come to me personally to talk about this. I think this person's identity must not be simple. Let me guess whether this person is Hitler. Burns was stunned for a while. Then there was a burst of hearty laughter. Ha ha ha, I also hope it's that fool. If so, you should be promoted to a general immediately, instead of the captain who is coming soon. Robert caught the point. Are you talking about the captain? Burns affirmed. Captain. After some explanations from his regimental commander, Robert learned that the last person he killed was a German regiment commander. Coupled with the more than 300 enemy soldiers he killed in this battle, this captain came as a matter of course. Burns was also nominated for promotion to lieutenant colonel because of his meritorious leadership. Although this proposal is still in the discussion stage, it is still close to 10. Therefore, Burns is now in high spirits during happy events and is very talkative. The two chatted for more than half an hour. Burns saw that Robert had gradually begun to perfunctory before he stopped after finishing the last topic. To be honest, Robert, sometimes I even wonder whether you are a human or a ghost, Burns said with emotion at the end of the conversation. Robert didn't say anything and just smiled. It wasn't until after watching Burns leave that he gave the answer himself, maybe it's a ghost. Looking up at the sky, Robert was actually happy to be promoted, but he was more confused because his current status was earned through living lives. Although he only sniped at the enemy from a distance on the battlefield and gave himself a psychological hint that this was just a shooting game, can a person deceive himself for a while and be able to deceive him for the rest of his life? Robert was an ordinary person in his previous life. Even after traveling through Marvel, he lived peacefully in the place where he was reborn. Killing may not be too scary for him, but he definitely doesn't care. As the Nazi nemesis of the US military and the messenger of hell in the eyes of the German army, Robert is now synonymous with executioner. But he is still full of fear of killing, which is why he usually only uses sniping at enemies. If he was allowed to end a person's life at close range, Robert would feel uncontrollably guilty. But if it was out of necessity, then Robert would still not hesitate to kill anyone who stood in his way, even if he felt guilty. Maybe I'm just a fool who does whatever it takes to achieve his goals. Robert suddenly laughed at himself as he watched the full moon covered by dark clouds. Robert's captain's uniform was delivered early the next morning. It must have been special care, otherwise it would not have been possible so quickly. During the Second World War, when there were no entertainment facilities, being in the wilderness was even more boring. Robert, who had had enough of lying in the barracks, originally planned to go to the wounded area for a walk. After all, it was well known that that place was the only place where women existed within dozens of miles. However, contrary to expectations, Robert bumped into Burns, who came to see him as soon as he went out. "Burns, you said you would come back and teach me marksmanship, do you remember?" Looking at Burns, who was full of expectations, Robert secretly thought that he was disappointed, and asked speechlessly, "Can't you come to me at another time? How about tonight?" Burns, "Not great." At the shooting range in the military camp, Robert taught his superior officer one move after another. In fact, what he taught was more based on his own experience. After all, he didn't know what the two special abilities of human body limit and sensitive sensor were. Teach. Although special abilities cannot be taught to people, Robert is a battlefield god with a record of sniping thousands of people. The experience alone is enough for Burns to have a good drink. He imparted his experience without reservation, and the result was that Major Burns, who was addicted to learning, pulled him to practice until the sun went down, which could last a whole day. Except for eating and going to the toilet, Robert was restricted to the shooting range the whole time. After seeing the sun go down and unable to see the target in the distance, Burns had the intention to stop, but he still pestered Robert with questions on the way back. "Are you saying that controlling breathing can also improve accuracy? Can you tell me the specific method?" As he spoke, he also took out a small notebook, apparently intending to record it and go back to read it. Robert was a little dizzy from his actions today. "Sir, it's my rest time now, remember." "That's true, but I feel that we are still on the battlefield even though this is the rear. But it doesn't mean absolute safety, so I think you should listen to your commander." "So what's the answer to the question, Captain?" Seeing that he had even revealed the relationship between superior and subordinate, Robert really wanted to slap himself when he promised to teach him marksmanship. "If I had known earlier, I would have prevaricated it." Robert had no choice but to teach for more than an hour. Until he couldn't stand it anymore, he tricked Burns into saying, "Sir, I think you have learned enough today. I once heard a saying that you can bite off more than you can chew. The cake has to be eaten in one bite. If you eat it all at once, you might choke to death." In order to support his statement, Robert asked about the knowledge points taught all morning. After thinking for a long time and finding that he could not answer it, Burns finally accepted Robert's statement and decided to learn it slowly. After all, Robert didn't know how to do it here. Run. Phew, finally sent him away. Seeing Burns still looking at his notes as he walked away, Robert somewhat understood how this young major, who had nothing to do with the army, came to be. That was earned through one's own perseverance and fearlessness on the battlefield. Burns didn't come to see him again for the next 2 days, and Robert got his wish and went to the place where the wounded were recuperating, but unfortunately there were no nurses there who fit his taste. Now Robert is not a creature who only knows how to think with his lower body when filled with that stuff. He has not yet reached the point where he is hungry and has no choice but to eat. Robert spent these 2 days in boredom until he met Colonel Philip on the 3rd day. His face was gloomy at this moment, but Robert just glanced at him and his attention was not on him at all, but on the person next to Colonel Philip. She had a pair of big brown eyes that deeply attracted Robert. As his eyes moved downward, the exquisite figure wrapped in the teacher's clothes made people even more mesmerized. But Robert took one look at Philip's terrible expression and finally suppressed the urge to strike up a conversation. As a result, just when he was about to turn around and walk away, he was spotted by the sharp-eyed Philip. "Robert, come with me." "Okay," responded. So Robert naturally joined Philip's team and stood next to the beautiful teacher. "Robert, Betty." Behind Philip, Robert whispered hello to the beautiful woman next to him, but it seemed that people saw his thoughts and just replied politely, "Carter." "Carter, what a familiar name," Robert muttered, but he didn't want his behavior to be regarded as a conversation that attracted other people's attention. "Really? The name Robert Betty is also familiar. You can't be the messenger of hell. Your name is very similar to him," Carter said with a very surprised expression. Robert was not a fool. Of course he could see that the other party was mocking him. After all, no one would associate Robert, a man who looked thin and peaceful at first glance, with the executioner hell messenger. This kind of ridicule was obviously intended to embarrass Robert. It was obvious that the man was not interested in him. Robert, who was asking for trouble, touched his nose and looked a little embarrassed. Colonel Philip walked in front, and the conversation between Robert and Carter naturally could not escape his ears. It was obvious that he was happy to see Robert in trouble, and his gloomy face revealed a smile unconsciously, but he quickly restrained it. Philip did not speak for Robert from beginning to end, and the group of people did not say anything else on the way. The atmosphere seemed a bit depressing unconsciously, and the command tent was not far away. This atmosphere did not last long. As soon as you walked into the tent, you could immediately notice that the table that was originally used to unfold the combat map was now filled with envelopes. Of course, Robert would not naively think that this was some kind of safety letter, because that thing did not need to be placed in the command tent, but was sent directly to the rear. Philip's next performance also confirmed this. The moment he saw those envelopes, he lost control of his emotions. He tossed his hat and cursed. "Fake, these Nazis, one day I will personally send them all to hell." Philip's performance has made it obvious that these envelopes are not for safety, on the contrary, they are for the families of those who died in the battle. Robert looked at the thick stack. He seemed to see not envelopes, but corpses lying there. For a moment, Robert thought about whether the same was true on the German side, the German soldiers he killed. How painful will it be for your family? But this kind of pity only existed for a moment, because Robert thought of the Asian battlefield thousands of miles away, and the persecution of the flower growers by the Japanese who had a good life. They are simply a group of things that cannot be called human beings, so how can the German Nazis who are as famous as them be any better? "Sir, these people are from..." After a brief silence, Robert was the first to ask, but he didn't expect that when he originally wanted to ask which regiment these people were from, Philip was the first to give the answer. "Most of them are from the 107th Regiment, and the survivors among them are on their way back." Robert, who knew the direction of the plot, should be extremely calm at this moment, but for some reason his chest felt tight for no reason, and an emotion called self-blame was brewing in his heart. "Sorry sir, I should go with them. Maybe I can." He was interrupted before he could finish his words. "Philip, listen Robert, no one knew this was a planned ambush. If I had sent you there, you probably wouldn't have come back. So you don't need to feel guilty about this. This is the purpose of why I asked you to come here." Carter was a little confused next to her. She didn't understand why Robert, a tall and thin boy with little flesh on his face, felt guilty for Agatha's actions. Even Colonel Philip came to enlighten him in person. Could it be? Carter suddenly thought of a possibility, and driven by curiosity, she couldn't help but said. Excuse me, Colonel Philip, Robert is not the rumored messenger of hell, is he? Philip saw that Robert still looked remorseful and decided to divert his attention. After all, Philip already treated Robert as a confidant. Philip. Yes, Carter, agent, just as you thought. The person in front of you is the Nazi nemesis who has been rumored for a long time. Carter. Oh, really? I thought the Hell Messenger should be a big muscular man. There was a look of surprise on her face. It was obvious that Carter had not thought of Robert as a Nazi nemesis from the beginning. Philip's purpose of diverting attention was obviously achieved. He was easily attracted to this beautiful agent who made Robert's heart beat. Robert, to be honest, I do have muscles all over my body, but it's just hidden by these clothes. Carter, you are so interesting. She pursed her red lips and pretended to be interested. This seems like a very ambiguous hint. If Robert was a fool, he might have one of the three major delusions in life: she likes me. But in fact, Robert's identity did change Carter's attitude, but it is impossible to fall in love with him because of it. Robert believed that Carter, one of the founders of S.H.I.E.L.D., would not be so superficial, and that she must have some purpose. Robert, who successfully remembered Carter's identity, already knew that most of the people in the 107th Regiment were probably not dead, but were captured by Hydra and taken to their base for human experiments. According to the development of the plot, even without Robert, Captain America will step forward to save them. This is also the battle that makes Captain America famous. After this battle, Captain America successfully got rid of his status as a speech vase and became a real warrior. What identity does Carter play in this? As one of the executors of the American Super Soldier Project, Carter certainly wouldn't want the only result of this experiment, Steve Rogers, Captain America, to be just a showman performing on the stage. Not to mention the reason why she still has a crush on Captain America. Carter's appearance here this time must be because he got the news that the 107th Regiment was ambushed. In fact, there is nothing special about the 107th Regiment. What is special is that it contains Captain America's good friend, James Barnes. Maybe she wants to find a strong supporter for the captain. Looking at Carter, who changed her indifferent expression in front of her, she smiled like a flower at this moment. But Robert didn't feel uncomfortable with this change, and subconsciously he even felt like a spring breeze. Carter, so Nazi nemesis of the US military, are you interested in telling me your story alone? The rhythm of the chat has been controlled by Carter, and she leads Robert's thoughts step by step. In fact, this was also the result of his obedience, because Robert seemed to know Carter's intentions. If you want to listen to a story, I suggest you go out and do it. There's an old man here too. While Philip signed the names of his condolences on the death letter, he saw off the guests in a depressed manner. He was not in a very good mood now. Yes, sir, Robert and Carter replied. They had their own thoughts and didn't want to get into trouble with Philip. Carter, I heard that you once killed 300 enemies in one day on the battlefield. Is that true? Robert, this kind of thing does happen, but it rarely happens. Usually there will be a large-scale cluster charge only when the enemy cannot attack for a long time. That's how this record came about. To be honest, in this kind of battle, just letting a machine gunner go up will achieve similar results. Walking on the path of the military camp, Carter chatted with Robert. She was smiling now, and with her beautiful face, she was simply an angel to Robert, who had not seen any women for months. Unconsciously, his eyes began to move downwards, but the cartoon seemed to be unaware and continued to talk to himself. Carter, you are so humble. You have to know that if you have such a record, many people will definitely want to talk about it everywhere, as if there is one person in the world who doesn't know that they have suffered a big loss. Robert, really, obviously I'm not the impetuous kind of person. Robert's eyes have been deeply attracted to a certain part of Carter's body, as if there was a whirlpool that sucked all his eyes in. However, the cartoon didn't seem to notice it at all, and continued to move forward with a smile on his face. Suddenly, Robert instinctively felt some threat, and he subconsciously ducked. Carter looked at Robert, who instantly dodged the communication stake and raised her eyebrows. Apparently she originally wanted to see him hit it. But even though what she wanted to see didn't happen, it didn't stop her from teasing Robert. Carter, The response is good, but I think if you could concentrate on watching the road, you wouldn't be as embarrassed as you are now. What a thorny flower. Robert sighed in his heart, understanding that Carter was warning him to clear his eyes. On the way next, Carter did not let the two of them be silent, and then asked some questions about Robert's impressive record, and he simply responded. The current situation is like having a big, fragrant steamed bun next to a person who has been hungry for several days, but you can only look at it but not eat it. What's the point of that? After chatting for a while, Robert finally couldn't help it anymore and asked directly, Instructor Carter, what can I do for you? Carter. Oh, that's right. According to reliable intelligence, not all the soldiers of the +07 regiment were killed. They were just taken to a place about 30 miles behind enemy lines. Robert already knew, so he didn't show surprise, but Carter thought Robert was indifferent. Carter. I thought the Hell Messenger would be a hero, but I didn't expect. Having said this, she paused for a moment, and then said in a very sarcastic tone, It seems that you are nothing more than that. After saying that, he planned to leave without looking back. However, Robert felt deeply disgusted with this behavior of leaving after taunting, especially the last words Carter said just now, which seemed to say, you can't do it. Robert is a normal person who is healthy both physically and mentally, at least he thinks he is healthy. A normal man would definitely not remain silent when faced with such doubts. Then what if I go to rescue them? Robert said loudly to Carter's back. A few steps away from him, Carter's indifferent expression with her back to him was instantly replaced by a look of joy, like a fox whose plan had succeeded, but the moment she turned around, her expression quickly returned to normal. Carter, if you can get those people out, maybe I could consider having dinner with you. This is a trick that Carter has tried many times when facing the opposite gender. Men, especially successful men, always like to conquer step by step when facing a good-looking opposite gender, which can give them a sense of accomplishment. Carter is taking advantage of this trait of successful men. She can always grasp the appropriate scale, with a warm and cold attitude, and can often control many men who think they are extraordinary. Come on, I don't have any fate with you. Why would I want to have dinner with you? However, her tried and tested trick seemed to have failed with Robert. This is also true, because he originally planned to be frozen into the 21st century with Captain America in the near future. The time constraints made him need a fast food more than a long-term relationship. Carter, what do you want? To be honest, she was a little surprised that Robert rejected her invitation, because according to her observation, Robert should be interested in her. Even though Robert may have made some excessive demands, Carter decided to listen to his conditions first given his reputation and ability as the messenger of hell. Of course Robert has thoughts about Carter. You must know that he, who has been single for more than 30 years, longs for a love, even if it is just a fast food. Not to mention that 5 months ago, when he was at the recruitment office, Robert lost his virginity to the young and beautiful nurse. This was a catalyst that made him like a powder keg that could explode at any time. It was okay when there was no spark to stimulate it, but if anything. Although Carter is like a blazing fire in Robert's heart, he also knows that she is an important figure in the future plot. If he allows his desires now, the plot may go awry, which is definitely not what he wants to see. Then let yourself enjoy yourself without changing the plot. An idea formed in my mind and was quickly adopted by my brain. Conditions. Robert touched his chin and pretended to be thinking, but in fact he was preparing words, because he suddenly realized that if he proposed a condition alone, Carter would probably add many terms, which led to this last move. Out of action. Rather than being rejected or having various restrictions placed on you, it's better to faint. After finishing speaking, Robert's expression was more formal than ever before. He said sincerely, You know, Agent Carter, I have been away from home for 5 months. To be honest, eating canned and instant food every day makes me almost sick. I think if possible, could you bring me a steak from Connor's Steakhouse on the west side of New York City? As he spoke, he seemed to think of something again, so Robert, whose acting skills were improving again, continued, Maybe it would be better if you could help me ask for leave to go back and see my parents. After saying that, he seemed to still have a wish, but also seemed to be struggling with which of the two ideas was more suitable. Robert's expressions that sometimes frowned and sometimes smiled made Carter a little unsure. Is he really just asking for these? She still had doubts in her mind, but Robert's next actions completely dispelled her doubts. Hey, Agent Carter, do you know? I have many good memories in New York. I didn't feel much when I was there, but now I have really left and gone to the battlefield. In this environment where you can die at any time, to be honest, I have some thoughts. That's it. Robert's emotions were brewing crazily, and his tone even began to choke as he continued. Maybe this is the feeling of thoughts I read in that book introducing China. That feeling is really uncomfortable, and my chest it's so boring that no medicine can cure it, it can only relieve it. That uncomfortable feeling is especially strong at night when there is a full moon in the sky. Especially at that time I was still shooting enemies on the battlefield. I knew that most of them deserved death, but I couldn't help it. The fear, really. That would make me want to go home more, to that simple but warm bed, instead of sleeping on the grass or in a mud puddle. I can't speak. Really, that feeling is really bad. After saying that, a tear fell down Robert's face, as if it was a sign that a certain gate was opening, and then the second, third, and seventh tears also rushed out, as if they didn't need money. Carter's mood at this time couldn't help but feel a little sad after Robert's call, but she still didn't let down all her vigilance, but she still leaned in out of her own heart. This was Carter's test. Robert seemed to have expected it. Looking at Carter who was slowly approaching, he hugged her into his arms. Obviously, Robert felt Carter's body stiffen, but he didn't resist. After his plan succeeded, he almost couldn't control himself when he smelled the fragrance of Carter, but in the end he suppressed the evil fire with reason. Robert knew well that he couldn't eat hot tofu in a hurry, so he started to perform even harder. He rested his head on Carter's shoulder, and still held his hand around his waist. He just made such regular movements without any other movements, and remained the same. The behavior of a deputy gentleman and a gentleman. Of course, his crying didn't stop, because just holding this delicate body made Robert feel intoxicated. Of course, he couldn't hold it forever, and as his tears dried up, the performance had to stop, otherwise it would be self-defeating. At the end of the hug, Robert wished he could turn all the water in his body into tears and let them flow. The advantage was taken, but Robert had not forgotten the topic. Thank you for the shoulder, I feel better. Carter, you're welcome. Robert's performance made her temporarily let down her guard, so that Carter only hesitated and agreed to the conditions he proposed later. Robert, I know I'm a little greedy but I don't want to embarrass you. Well, how about you promise me a condition that is within your own ability and does not violate your principles? Looking at Carter with a sincere face, to be honest, Robert felt a little uneasy. I was afraid that my previous performances would be in vain. After just a moment of hesitation, Carter agreed, okay, just think that my condition gives you the motivation to take action. The moment the results came out, Robert knew that he had worried too much. Apparently at this moment, Carter thought that his condition was just for some specialties from his hometown, and no matter how extreme, he just wanted to go home. Sometime after noon, the command to assemble in Robert's military camp began to come out, but this time the soldiers who walked out of the tent did not feel nervous at all. Instead, they walked slowly in groups in the direction of the Union, without any sense of tension on the frontline battlefield, and even bursts of laughter could be heard from time to time in some small groups. It's all because today's gathering of officers at all levels has been notified, and they are gathering to watch the show. This is completely voluntary. If you don't want to watch the show, you can just stay in your bed and not come out. But obviously the bustling scene in the military camp means that few people choose the latter. In this show that has already been revealed to have beautiful girls dancing, those who don't come either have physical problems or mental problems. As a normal person, Robert walked out of his tent, but he didn't expect that Burns, whom he hadn't seen in the past 2 days, was already waiting for him outside. Robert was very satisfied that he didn't bother him for 2 days, so he simply went up to him. Are you going to see the show too? Burns, what if? Robert, I thought you would hold that notebook and practice your marksmanship. Burns, oh, come on. You and I both know that there will be many beautiful girls participating in the show this time. You know, you can practice marksmanship on the front line at any time, but young girls are not always available. Robert, for a very valid reason. Robert was satisfied with Burns's superb consciousness. For a moment, he even felt like he had met a close friend. The two of them walked to the gathering place and talked happily along the way. Burns, you know, it's the most enjoyable when you're on top of a woman. Let me tell you about that stuff. Along the way, Robert and Burns chatted more and more happily. In the end, the topic was so sensitive that they had to hold each other's shoulders and discuss it in a low voice. Hello, sir. Regarding the knowledge taught by Burns, Robert originally wanted to know a more comprehensive process, but he was interrupted by a loud report. Hello, Captain Robert, Colonel Burns. Hello, sirs. Hello, Captain. Dear Nazi nemesis, can you sign your autograph for me? Although Robert lives in this military camp, he usually lives in places where there are more officers. Ordinary soldiers there are not able to enter just when they want. Now that Robert came out to watch the performance, he gave these ordinary American soldiers a chance. They finally saw their idol outside the battlefield, and it was hard not to be excited. Robert looked at the guys surrounding him. If this was a group of young girls, he might be able to accept it, but he didn't want to stay longer with a group of old men. After all, the principle of same-gender repulsion is not unreasonable. Okay, everyone, let's go and concentrate on waiting for the performance. I can see it at any time, but I don't know when the next time I will see those young girls is. After Robert signed a few loyal fans who had already planned and even brought pens and paper, he persuaded the others in a humorous tone. His prestige made almost no one dare to object. The crowd began to disperse, but without exception, they all consciously reserved the best viewing position. Robert followed the path left by the crowd and walked to the middle. Location. Hello, Captain Robert. Captain, please allow me to express my respect for you. There were people everywhere he walked along the way. Although they obeyed the order and did not surround Robert anymore, these American soldiers would still say hello to Robert when he passed by them. Well, hello. Thank you for the compliment. Well, hello. Thank you for the compliment. When people say hello, Robert considers himself not an indifferent person, and he responds to them one by one. Burns. Robert. He was blocked behind a human wall. The American soldiers around him seemed to only have eyes for their idol, Nazi nemesis, completely unaware that a major was being squeezed into a meat pie by them. Robert. Well, hello. Robert, who regarded Burns as a soldier, was about to reply and move on, but he didn't want Burns to grab his clothes. Well, I'm sorry, you guys seem to have squeezed this major. Robert, who saw Burns, kindly gave a warning to the soldiers closest to him. Ah, sorry sir, I'm really sorry, I didn't see you just now. Please forgive. Burns, who was finally noticed by others, finally squeezed out of the crowd and came to Robert's side. He waved his hands to the soldiers who apologized to him. The soldiers who were originally relieved did not expect his next words. Let them break the defense directly. From now on, your daily training standards will be increased 5 times. It turns out that Burns was not waving his hand, but saying 5 times. Robert was secretly amused, but the punished soldiers looked at him with pleading eyes, but he had no choice but to be the first one. Major, calm down. I don't think they did it on purpose. 5 times is indeed too much. How about letting them do twice as much physical training in the next week? After saying that, he winked at the soldiers and signaled them to express their stance. Major, we know we were wrong, please forgive me. The neat apology and Robert's persuasion made Burns finally feel at ease. Burns, since Captain Robert is interceding for you, let's do it twice as much. Yes. The few soldiers who had escaped not only expressed their gratitude to Robert with their eyes, but also hurriedly moved out of the way, fearing that they would cause trouble to the major again. With the lessons learned from the past, the road ahead was extremely smooth, and Robert and Burns were no longer dispersed by the crowds. Arriving at the central position, there was no bench. Robert and Burns just sat on the ground. The soldiers around them quickly imitated their actions when they saw them, especially those in front of them who easily blocked their sight. After sitting down, Burns began to express his dissatisfaction with Robert. To be honest, Robert, next time I participate in this kind of event with you, I might prepare a police platoon to protect myself. As long as you are happy. Robert didn't take Burns' words to heart. He replied somewhat perfunctorily, because the American team had already arrived on the stage above. Are you ready to join me in beating Hitler up? Steve Rogers, the famous Captain America, is of course only famous among children in the United States at this time. The soldiers who were originally looking forward to the beauty's performance were full of malice towards this muscular man wearing the stars and stripes who suddenly appeared. Coupled with what Captain America said at the beginning, the soldiers wanted to laugh when they heard it. You must know that no one wears the stars and stripes to fight on the battlefield, at least not before. They already regarded Steve as a showman, and of course they didn't bother to respect him. The soldiers were more looking forward to the performances of the beauties. After Captain America said his first words at the beginning, the scene fell surprisingly silent, and no one among the thousands of people below responded to him. A little embarrassed, Steve forced himself to calm down and continued, "Okay, is it voluntary?" "That's me, otherwise why would I be here?" Captain America responded this time, but it was obvious that the soldier who spoke was not in good faith. "Ha ha ha, you're right, it's a question only a fool asks, ha ha. Hey, how about we kick this idiot off?" "I agree, hurry up and let the beauties come on stage, and let this fool get off." The crowd said that they didn't know who started it, so they picked up the fruits and snacks they brought and threw them at them. Some people even threw stones. The scene was in chaos. Captain America was embarrassed on the stage using his shield to block the things thrown at him. He wanted to save the situation and shouted loudly, "Don't be like this, brothers. Remember, we are in the same group." However, this did not help. On the contrary, more people began to pick up things and throw them at him. Robert looked at the embarrassed figure of the American team on the stage, and he suddenly thought that this might be a good time to increase his favorability. Burns looked excited and threw things on the stage with the soldiers. When he couldn't find the stone, the nearby soldiers spontaneously handed it to him. He threw it away and shouted, "Get out of here, you fool. If you don't let the girls come up, I'm going to pull out a gun and shoot you. I really hope you don't wet your pants then, ha ha ha." Quote. Looking at the Major, who was full of excitement and saliva flying everywhere, Robert covered his face with one hand and didn't want to admit that he knew him, but when he thought about his future plans, he still resisted the discomfort and pulled Burns. "Robert, Major, I really don't want to disturb you, but I think you should change sides. I know this man, and I want to help him and give him face." Burns, what? He was a little confused by Robert's big call. He needed some time to process the information. At this moment, Robert stood up and shouted loudly, "Quiet, everyone." His words were so powerful that half of the people in the audience heard them, and those further away who didn't hear clearly were also reminded by their friends nearby. At this moment, silence returned to the scene. Steve on the stage took off the shield in confusion. He saw that the chaotic scene just now quickly calmed down after one person stood up. It seemed that no one dared to make trouble again. Burns, who also reacted at this time, also stood up. At this time, he looked solemn and said with a strong voice, "What do you guys want to do? Are you going to rebel?" His words echoed in the silent field. If it weren't for the drool that Burns didn't have time to wipe off the corner of his mouth, he might look even more majestic now. Robert was very satisfied with his teammates' assistance. After patting him on the shoulder and whispering a reminder, Captain America on the stage said sincerely, "Please continue." Steve, oh, okay, where did I say it? Robert, are you ready to beat Hitler with me? Steve, oh, thank you for reminding me. What I'm going to talk about next is the great plan to defeat the Nazis. Steve was finally able to finish his speech quietly on the stage, and there were only some whispers in the audience, because no one dared to make a mistake anymore because of Robert's intimidation. Burns, who had just finished wiping his mouth, looked at Steve on the stand, then at Robert, and then said, "I didn't expect him to be your friend. I'm really sorry. How about I apologize to him later?" Robert didn't expect that Burns would actually say this. He was stunned, and then he realized that Burns only said this because he truly regarded him as a friend. "Robert, my friends are very generous, no need to apologize, and let me tell you." Covering his mouth with his hand, Robert approached Burns' ear mysteriously and said, "He didn't see you throwing him away. As long as you behave normally in the future, he will never suspect it." Burns, really? Robert, yes. Burns, okay then. Steve, the evil Nazis will eventually be defeated by the righteous U.S. military. Captain America, who finally finished his speech on the stage, breathed a sigh of relief. He bowed to the audience, not knowing whether he was facing Robert intentionally. Okay, thank you Captain for your speech. Let's all applaud. Ba bang bang. Robert, who wanted to increase the captain's favorability, certainly couldn't be idle at this moment. He stood up again and took the lead in applauding. The soldiers on the field applauded regardless of whether they wanted to or not. So Steve slowly walked off the stage amidst a round of applause. It is worth noting that when he left, he glanced at Robert with grateful eyes, and Robert responded with a sincere smile. It wasn't until Steve stepped off the stage and the beautiful girls came on stage that he stopped his hypocritical smile, replaced by an even more arrogant evil smile. Robert, ha ha ha, dance quickly, babies, the gentlemen are waiting to see. The scene that was a little dull just now because of Robert's majesty became lively again after he took the lead in demonstrating. Girls, raise your legs a little bit. Yes. That's it, let me have a good look. Hey, the guy in front of you is blocking my view of the beautiful woman. Sit down quickly. Beauties on stage, are you interested in taking a look at your abs after the performance? The constant obscenities, ubiquitous whistles and obscene laughter made Robert feel that he had entered a bandit's den rather than a regular army camp. Perhaps because he ran out of excitement when he was with Captain America, Burns is not yelling or spitting like a madman now, but what he said next. Burns, Robert, what do you think of the second row, third from the left? Robert, it's very beautiful. What's the problem? Burns, you don't like her, do you? If you do, I advise you to change your target as soon as possible. Having said this, he seemed to have regained some of his sanity, and seemed to know that he couldn't beat Robert, so he changed his strategy and played the emotional card. How about you give her to me? Just for the sake of me speaking for your friend just now. Is there a target that attracted me so I didn't scream? Thinking to himself, Robert also took a look at the girl Burns mentioned. To be honest, she was indeed very beautiful, which made him a little moved. Robert would not give up just because of a call from Burns, but when he saw Carter, who stood out from the crowd not far away, waving at him, obviously something was wrong, he had no choice but to give up the goal. It's a pity. Well, I will withdraw from the competition with her. I wish you good luck and a beautiful girl. Before leaving, Robert did not forget to encourage Burns. Don't worry, as long as you don't rob me, no one in the entire camp except Colonel Phillip is my opponent. After speaking, Burns licked his lips, looking like he was sure of victory. Robert's journey out of the crowd was exceptionally smooth. Although the current soldiers' hormones were stimulated by the beautiful women on the stage, it was obvious that they did not dare to get carried away in front of this messenger from hell. After walking out of the crowd, Carter came forward. She looked at the posing women on the stage behind Robert, with a trace of disdain flashing in her eyes. Seeing that Robert didn't forget to look back after he came to her, she felt a little uncomfortable for no reason. If you can't bear to part with this hormone-filled performance, you might be able to stay and watch it. There will even be beautiful women throwing themselves into your arms after the performance. After Carter finished speaking, he turned around and left. Robert, who knew the plot, certainly knew that Captain America would take action soon. Not wanting his plan to fail, he could only reluctantly give up on a newly discovered goal and turned around to follow Carter's pace. Hey, what do you want from me? Robert caught up with Carter and asked knowingly. Carter, who was still angry for some unknown reason, had no expression on his face. When Robert didn't know why he provoked her, Carter said with dignity, "Do you still remember the agreement?" "Oh, of course I remember. So are we going to take action? When? What is the plan?" Robert really couldn't figure out how to provoke Carter, so he simply didn't think about it and directly started to care about the next issue of rescuing the 107th Regiment. When talking about business, Carter, as an agent, would certainly not be emotional. She put on a serious look on her face and said, "The plan is to sneak in and rush in. Because this operation is too dangerous, Colonel Phillip is unwilling to provide any form of support. If he knew even the bar would allow action." Speaking of this, Carter paused. She quickly looked at Robert's face. After finding no fear at all, she nodded secretly with satisfaction and continued. "So our plan will not have any military assistance, we can only rely on you." Robert, he looked confused at the moment, as if asking who else besides him had been invited by Carter. Yes, is us. Before Carter had time to answer, a figure came out. He was wearing a pair of red boots. In addition to the stars and stripes on his body, he also held a shield in his hand. Apparently there is only one person in this military camp who can dress like this. Robert. Captain, are you saying we act together? Steve. Yes, don't worry, I won't hold you back. Obviously Robert's words caused some misunderstandings to the American captain who has never been on the battlefield. Robert. I think you misunderstood, Captain. You may not know that I saw you take action on the pier in Southwest New York 5 months ago. Do you know, I didn't know that people could be so strong. I thought if I could ask you, can you sign your name for me? As he spoke, Robert took out the pen and paper and looked at Steve sincerely. However, his operation confused Steve and Carter who were present. Captain America. Oh, I remember. It was me chasing the Hydra killer, wasn't it? Steve, who was the first to break the calm, obviously remembered the doc that Robert mentioned, and Robert continued to act stupid and dumbfounded. Hydra. What Hydra? I just remember what the person you beat up said. When you cut off one head, a second one will grow. It was Steve who wanted to say more, but was stopped by Carter. She changed the subject and said, Hydra is nothing to talk about. They are just dirty fools and not worth our distraction. Now let's talk about how to rescue the 107th Regiment. Soldier's problem. Steve knew that he almost made a mistake, because Hydra is a secret, and only the top brass of the entire US military knew of its existence. Perhaps it was its terrifying strength that forced the top brass to hide their existence, so as not to affect military morale. Robert smiled secretly in his heart at the two people in front of him who didn't want him to know what Hydra existed. He even knew the leader of Hydra 70 years later. If he knew it well, he would probably be the #1 person in the current US military. One person. But this was nothing to show off, so he didn't say anything, but smiled and said to Steve, Then Captain, how about we adopt the tactic of hiding and then storming out? Seeing that Robert was not entangled in the topic of Hydra, Carter and Steve did not mention it again, and Steve was quite satisfied with Robert's proposal. Steve. Just do it. Carter watched from the sidelines as the plan was successfully formulated. Although it looked a bit hasty, she had no doubt that the two of them could succeed. Needless to say, Steve, an enhanced soldier who has used the super serum, has no doubt of his ability, not to mention that this operation involves Robert, the Hell Messenger, who has made countless German soldiers fearful. After Carter went back, he specifically checked Robert's record. It was public content and easy to see. To be honest, after spending half an hour reading it, Carter was beyond shocked. She once doubted whether Robert was a human being, because judging from the public information alone, these were not things that humans could do. The highest kill record in a single day is 609, beheading enemy generals alone, 1 colonel, 1 lieutenant colonel, 0 major, 7 captain, 23, facing a battalion of enemy troops alone hold on to Highland 465 for 10 hours. Each and every brilliant achievement, if one happened to an ordinary person, he would be proud of it for a lifetime. However, it took Carter half an hour to finish reading these things at the speed of 1 glance and 10 lines. Although it was mixed with long words of praise and words that sounded like exclamations from the recorder, it still shocked Carter. Looking at Robert, who was so close, she didn't even know whether to call him a human or a demigod. Perhaps this is the reason why he became a second lieutenant at such a young age. If he had been older and had more experience as mentioned by the old guys who control promotions, it would not be impossible for him to become a colonel with these achievements. Single quote. Carter sighed in her heart. She seemed a little aggrieved for Robert, but when her eyes glanced at Steve, she quickly came back to her senses. She didn't know the reason for this emotion, and she didn't even want to think about it in detail. In order to distract himself and make the subsequent rescue smoother, Kata suggested, Gentlemen, now that the plan has been drawn up, we may be able to select some suitable weapons. After a pause, she stared at Steve and said, Especially your captain, you look good now, but you don't have much fighting ability. Carter will drive Robert and Steve out of the military camp and drive all the way to the nearest military temporary airport. While driving, Carter explained, A friend of mine is there. He is one of the most famous scientists in the United States and one of the few people who is willing to help us. Steve, then we should really thank you for being our friend. Captain America, who didn't know anything yet, was already full of gratitude and goodwill for Carter's friend. But what if he knew that Carter's friend's name was Howard Stark, a famous playboy, and that Carter's condition for his help was to have dinner with him? Carter just nodded at Steve's words, obviously not wanting to dwell on this issue, but change the subject. This friend of mine is not only a scientist, but can also provide us with the most advanced weapons. At the same time, he is also a good pilot. He can also help us enter the enemy's hinterland, so that you two can take action. Steve, a perfect plan. Steve and Carter were basically talking along the way, while Robert sat in the back and rarely said a word. After all, he may have talked too much to Carter at this time, which caused a gap between the American teammate who admired Carter and himself. This is undoubtedly not conducive to Robert's plan. The night gradually began to fill the air, and Robert, the captain, and the other 3 people successfully passed the inspection of the military airport and sneaked in. Maybe he felt it was too boring not to talk, Carter explained to Steve and Robert. This is the only airport I have access to. The original intention was to make it easier to travel to New York from here, but apparently they didn't mind letting me change my route without their knowledge. Steve, if this gets you into trouble, I guess we can drive there and it'll be fine. The big warm man beauty team was obviously afraid that his sweetheart would take responsibility. He originally wanted to make the decision by himself, but suddenly realized that Robert was beside him. Steve, who thought he was not as important as the Hell Messenger, yet couldn't help but look at him with questioning eyes. Robert, it doesn't matter, I don't care. Carter saw that Steve really meant this, and Robert didn't object to her speaking out in a hurry. Listen, gentlemen, as long as you don't run away while you're in action, no one will find out. Seeing that Steve was still worried, she emphasized, when you successfully bring the survivors back, it won't be a big deal even if you are discovered, but if. Obviously her words successfully changed the topic. When Steve heard Carter say, if, he understood that she meant that if the action failed, she would definitely be implicated. Steve, there are no ifs. I will definitely be able to bring James and the soldiers of the 107th Regiment back. I will use my life as a guarantee. Carter was obviously relieved. She obviously didn't want the price she paid to go to waste, and if Captain America drove or walked over, the rescue time would undoubtedly be greatly delayed. You must know that the place where the soldiers of the 107th Regiment are detained is 30 kilometers behind the tightly defended enemy. Although she does not doubt the strength of the 2 men, there is obviously no need to waste that time. Park outside a hangar. Carter, we have arrived, gentlemen. She took the lead out of the car, opened a small door and walked in, while Steve and Robert followed her lead. Hey look, is this the hero who goes to the front line to save the soldiers? When Carter entered the hangar with Steve and Robert, someone took the initiative to greet him. Carter, Howard Stark, he is the friend I said is willing to help us. She first pointed at Howard and introduced. Steve, who was wearing the stars and stripes, was obviously more proactive. He stepped forward to shake hands with Howard and introduced himself. Steve Rogers, this is Robert Betty. Nice to meet you. He also volunteered to introduce Robert. Howard, I'm glad to meet you too, but I'm afraid now is not the time to get to know each other. For some reason, Steve felt that Howard in front of him didn't seem to like shaking hands with him. But before he had time to think deeply, his thoughts were interrupted by Howard's next move. Howard pointed to the stars and stripes on the table not far away. It's a carbon particle polymer that can withstand attacks from ordinary daggers. But I don't think the Nazis would use that thing to attack, but it's better than nothing. I think it's more suitable for your captain. Steve touched the dress and was very satisfied. Seeing how much the captain couldn't put it down, Howard said proudly, that's not all, Captain, I heard that you like to use shield. Steve, yeah, it works better than I thought. Howard, then take a look at the shield I prepared for you. Do you like it? As he spoke, he pointed to a few shields in the corner. In fact, they could only be piled there because the space on the table was limited. While Steve was choosing shield, Howard walked up to Robert and introduced him. The Steven sniper rifle has the characteristics of being quiet and easy to carry. Due to the lack of time, I can only find this one. If you are interested, if so, I might be able to tailor one for you next time. Robert took Stephen in his hand. To be honest, he didn't know where Howard got this weapon. He had never heard of it in his previous life. However, he was too lazy to dwell on this. Instead, he was interested in what Howard said about building a weapon for him personally, and glanced at the captain who had already selected the shield. Robert stared at the remaining few extra shields and said, "I think the captain doesn't need those extra shields. If my guess is correct, they are not ordinary metal, right?" Howard was a little confused at first and didn't know why Robert asked this question, but it only took him a moment to react. And tentatively said, "Of course they are not ordinary metals. In fact, I have very little stock of that metal. You don't want to use them to make a gun, do you?" If Robert really thinks so, Howard will be in trouble, because the metal used to make Steve's shield is not only very small, but also difficult to make into guns with current technology. Why do you think that? However, Robert didn't think about that at all. What he wanted was actually a knife. Which man could resist a sharp knife made of vibranium? Howard breathed a sigh of relief after hearing Robert's idea. He was really afraid of using vibranium to make a sniper rifle. After all, that thing is so hard that normal gun-making techniques are completely useless. Then we have to explore new manufacturing methods, but with current technology, the possibility is almost non-existent. Howard, although it's still a little difficult, it's not too much. So what style do you want? Robert, I only have one request, and the power is second. I want its shape to be as cool as possible. Man, I believe in your aesthetic. Howard raised his eyebrows after hearing Robert's words and looked at him in surprise. I didn't expect you to be such a tasteful person. When I first heard about you, I thought you would be a rough guy who only knows how to kill people. Perhaps realizing that he had made a mistake, Howard apologized to Robert. Well, I'm sorry, actually what I want to say is that I will try my best to make that knife the best it can be. Robert, who had known Howard's virtues for a long time, did not take his previous words to heart. For such a high-minded playboy, it was good for him to apologize. Perhaps compared to his son, the more famous Tony Stark in later generations, Howard is relatively low-key and easy to get along with. Robert, I think we can become friends after this operation, so there is no need to apologize for these little things. Howard, then I hope your operation will end soon. Steve, don't worry, that's absolutely true. Steve, who had already changed into a new combat uniform, joined in the conversation. The three of them originally wanted to chat a few more words, but Carter looked at his watch at this time. I don't want to disturb your chat, but if we don't take action soon, it will be dawn. At that time, flying a small military plane that cannot be armed with any ammunition will be tantamount to. She didn't finish her words, but she succeeded in reminding everyone. Howard, oh, I'm so sorry to keep you waiting, ma'am. He looked at Robert and Steve with a pity expression. It looks like we have to wait for some time before we can talk freely. I hope it won't be too long. Robert, that'll be quick. Trust me, what do you say, Captain? Steve, Robert is right. I won't keep my future friends waiting. Carter, then get on the plane and go. She took the lead and boarded the small military transport plane that had been prepared. Of course, she was not the one driving the plane. Steve watched Carter's movements and hurried to follow. Robert and Howard were the only two people present. Looking at Carter and Steve who had left, Howard complained, "How can the plane get out without opening the door to the hangar? How can we break it open?" Robert, maybe that's a good idea. Joking, Robert and Howard opened the hangar door together and then boarded the plane together. It would take at least 20 minutes to fly from the military airport where Robert and the others were located to the expected air landing location. Howard made a joke on the plane at this moment. Captain, you were right. We did have the ability to talk freely very quickly, but I never thought that this would happen before the rescue operation started. Steve, I thought so too, but obviously we ignored the time on the plane. As time went by, Robert also joined the chatting team. They chatted happily at first, until Howard suddenly asked Carter, who didn't speak much. Agent Carter, if you are not in a hurry to go back, we can go to Lucerne and eat the famous hot pot there. Visibly, the atmosphere at the scene began to quiet down, and Carter looked a little flustered and glanced at Steve with a bit of embarrassment. After a few seconds of silence, Steve couldn't help but ask stiffly with facial movements. You, want to eat hot pot. However, Carter did not answer. Instead, he took out 2 small boxes and handed them to Steve and Robert while explaining. This is a signal transmitter. As long as you turn it on, we can find you through the signal. Robert, thank you. Taking the small box, Robert stuffed it into his pocket without looking at it, and then lay down next to him without saying a word. He started to do this when Howard asked the question, because it was obvious that now was not the time to talk. Carter nodded to Robert's thanks, but Steve on the side didn't give up and wanted to continue asking. About that thing just now. Unexpectedly, before he finished speaking, the German troops on the ground discovered the enemy plane at the right time. They poured anti-aircraft guns upwards. In order to avoid Howard, they could only swing left and right, so they stopped talking. Steve looked at Carter across from him, who had not answered his question from beginning to end. He didn't know whether he was sulking or worried about Howard and her safety. Anyway, he suggested to Robert, "How about we just go down from here and let them return home?" "Robert, just do it." As soon as Steve's words came out of his mouth, Robert walked to the door of the cabin, opened the door and jumped out without even thinking about it. "Carter, come back quickly, our plan is to send you to the door of the opponent's base." Carter, who was distracted for some reason, didn't come back to his senses until Robert jumped down. "I'll go with Robert. After I jump down, you can go back from this hellish place." "Carter, you can't give me orders, our plan is at the gate of the enemy's base." "Steve, why not? I'm Captain America." After saying that, he also jumped off with his parachute bag on his back. So far, only Howard and Carter were left on the plane. The enemy's anti-aircraft artillery cannot output all the time. It always needs to replenish ammunition. Howard took this opportunity to increase the flight altitude and rushed towards his own base as quickly as possible. While running away, he still had time to talk. "Carter, shall we go to Lucerne for hot pot later, or shall we go back to New York for steak?" "Carter, sorry Howard, I'm not feeling well today, how about another day?" As she looked at Howard's back, Carter had a headache and remembered that she had agreed to have dinner with Howard in exchange for his help, and her tone couldn't help but soften a lot. "Carter, just tomorrow. I think I will be much better tomorrow." She originally thought her words would make the dude flying the plane in front of her happy, but she didn't expect that Howard refused this time. "You should have a crush on Steve, right? Kindness." Carter gave an affirmative answer to his question without thinking. "Howard, originally, I wanted to take this opportunity to spend the night with you, but it seems I have no chance. Let's forget about dinner. I think I should change my goal." His words undoubtedly removed a stone that was weighing on Carter's heart. Although it sounded like being abandoned, Carter, who was in a happy mood at the moment, didn't care at all. "Howard, you're such a good guy. If Robert were here, after listening to Carter's words, he would definitely reject this card, which is usually only awarded to honest people, but Howard was from 1943 after all, and he had no such concept. Howard, I feel that everything is worth it to be praised by a beautiful girl. I wish you and the captain a long life together. Carter, thank you, and I hope you find the right partner as soon as possible." On the plane, because Howard took the initiative to give up his thoughts about Carter, the gap between the two quietly disappeared, and they quickly became good friends. On the ground, when Steve landed, he found that all the enemy's ambush here had been eliminated, and Robert was standing not far away waving to him. I looked at no less than 30 people lying on the ground nearby. "You are so strong. It's hard to imagine how you did it in such a short period of time." Robert, who has always been modest, did not take this opportunity to show off. "It's not easy for me either." Well, it's not easy. From the time he landed to the present, he has been punched more than 30 times each. The sweat on his head is almost coming out. Steve nodded. He also felt that even with Robert's ability, it would not be easy to defeat more than 30 enemies in 1 minute. He seemed a little ashamed that he had not been able to participate in the battle just now. "It's okay, Captain, there's still time for you to show off later." As Robert spoke, he pointed to a tall building a few kilometers away that was clearly visible in the moonlight. Obviously, this should be the enemy base mentioned in the intelligence. In the woods, Robert and Steve were running at a speed far beyond ordinary people. The enemy base, which was originally a few miles away, arrived within 10 minutes, and they also took the opportunity to conduct reconnaissance. That is a good sniper spot. From there, I can at least clearly see almost all the targets in the bunker. Robert pointed in a direction and introduced to the American team out of breath. Obviously, he was still a relatively strong ordinary person. After running a few kilometers, he would definitely not behave like Steve, or even more relaxed than him. Doesn't that make people see the problem at a glance? Moreover, he came here with a sniper on his back, so he should have the awareness to be a long-range assistant. He can't use the gun as a fire stick to hit others at close range, right? Hey man, you okay? Robert's performance successfully deceived Captain America. At this time, he was patting Robert's back gently with a worried look on his face. Steve was very fond of this teammate who helped him, and he didn't want Robert to waste time just because of his willfulness on the plane. After resting for a while, Robert's condition improved a lot, although he was still out of breath. Thank you for your concern. After saying "gudong" and swallowing a mouthful of saliva, Robert spoke normally. I'll go to that location to clear the obstacles for you, but I can't help you inside the building. Is it okay to leave it to you? There is a defensive enemy base in front of him, but for ordinary people, if Robert wants to, he is confident that he can eliminate 99% of the enemies inside within half an hour. The reason why it is not 100% is because there is also an enhanced human Red Skull inside, which may take some time. However, the purpose of coming today is not to watch a performance, but to see Steve's debut on the battlefield. It would be better for Robert to just play support. Team USA Steve had no objection to Robert's proposal. Firstly, because Robert was famous for his sniping, he subconsciously believed that it was the most suitable for long-range attacks. Secondly, Team USA was confident enough. Check the clock, I will arrive at that location in 5 minutes. Then you can lurk in and I will adapt to circumstances to help you eliminate the threat. Captain America. Okay. At this time, White Belly had turned up on the horizon. Captain America stood in the bushes and looked at the time that had passed for 4 minutes and 15 seconds, and began to formulate a hidden plan in his mind. But with the tall barbed wire fence outside the base and the bright, rotating searchlights, for a moment he didn't know how to start. Ouch, maybe it would be easier for me to attack. Rumble. Just at this moment, a group of German troops and military vehicles approached in the distance. Steve hurriedly hid. 5 minutes had passed. Looking at the convoy that was about to pass by, he suddenly had an idea. When the last car in the convoy passed by, Captain America immediately ran up and jumped into the car. Hello. As soon as Captain America stood still, he found 2 stunned German soldiers looking at him. After a friendly greeting, Steve resolved the fight as quickly as possible and threw the 2 out. On a high ground outside the German army, or Hydra base, Robert observed the American team with his sniper rifle and found that he entered as smoothly as in the plot before. He felt relieved. Behind him, there were no less than 50 people lying on the ground in despair. You must know that Hydra would not trick someone like him who is not the protagonist. Of course there are people in such an important position, but they are obviously not Robert's opponents. Well, it's really heavily guarded. From the sniper scope, Robert saw no less than 200 to 300 fixed sentries in the opponent's base, as well as a dozen or so training teams of 20 people. It could be said that the chance of being discovered if he hit any of them now was extremely high. However, even with this hellish defense, he was suddenly sneaked in by Captain America's walking style. It wasn't until he saw him walking into the building that Robert put down his gun and stopped observing. I really don't know whether it's because the aura of the captain and the protagonist is too strong, or if it's because of Hydra's powerful outsiders, and it's all mixed in. Sitting on the top of the mountain, Robert complained and shook his head. He knew that the battle in the building might not end for a while, so out of boredom, he simply closed his eyes and rested. Inside the Hydra base, where the 107th Regiment and some other American soldiers were detained, the number of Hydra guards gradually decreased from the original 20 or so. They were not lazy, but never came out whenever they passed a shadow. Boom. When there was only the last person left, Captain America simply did not hide his figure. He ran straight towards the Hydra soldier and killed him before the other party had time to resist. The sound on the top of the cage certainly woke up the American soldiers below. When Captain America appeared in front of them, one of them curiously asked, "Who are you?" "Ha, well, I am Captain America." Obviously it was not easy for Captain America to knock down more than 20 people in a short period of time. He answered the man with a slight breath. "Well, what did you say?" The soldiers still had questions, but Captain America, knowing that time was running out, picked up the key and opened the prison door. Sometimes actions speak louder than words. When he opened the door, the captured U.S. soldiers didn't ask any questions about their identity. After almost everyone was released, Captain America glanced around and found that there was no one he was looking for. He asked with the last glimmer of hope, "Is there anyone else? I'm looking for Sergeant James Barnes. Do you know where he is?" But everyone that Captain America saw shook their heads. When he was about to give up, a person nearby gave him the last place in the base where American prisoners could be found. "There is an isolation cell in the base, but no one can get out alive." "Steve, okay, but even if the hope is slim, I have to try. That's my best friend." The person who just spoke shook his shoulders, trying to persuade him not to have too much hope, but the words came out as, "Good luck." Steve nodded firmly, then told a few people around him the direction of the door, and then planned to go find his friend Barnes by himself. "Wait, are you going alone?" In response to doubts, Captain America replied in a joking tone, "Of course. I've beaten Hitler more than 200 times, it's not difficult." As soon as he finished speaking, he hurriedly left, leaving behind a group of bewildered soldiers. "Oh, right." Steve, who was running far away, suddenly remembered something and shouted to the people behind him, "Robert is waiting for you outside. Follow the messenger from hell and beat up the Nazis outside." "What? The messenger from hell is here too? I don't think he's lying. Then what are you waiting for? Go ahead. Hell's messenger is here to save us." Everyone rush outside. Rush. Chapter 11. Outside the Hydra base, the sky was already bright. Robert was lying on the mountain not far away and sleeping comfortably with his sniper rifle in his arms, but then, boom! A very loud explosion, accompanied by intermittent and gradually increasing gunshots, successfully woke Robert up. Well, so fast. Robert, who was in a deep sleep just now, was suddenly awakened. His brain had not yet recovered, and he did not really wake up until 2 seconds later. He stuck his head out to take a look at the situation, and found that the Hydra base underneath was still in chaos. Several hundred American prisoners of war in somewhat tattered clothes rushed out of the building and started to attack the completely unaware Hydra soldiers outside. Sneak attack. You really deserve to be beaten. Why did you feed the prisoners so much? Do you want them to have enough strength to beat you? Robert raised his gun and complained while sniping at the Hydra below. To be honest, he felt like he was playing a game right now. Because the enemies on the opposite side feel as if they have been dehumanized, as if they are human machines specially built for the protagonist to upgrade. An average of 1 kill every 2 seconds. This was the result of Robert's attack, but there were only a few hundred Hydra soldiers below. Under the attack of hundreds of wolf-like American prisoners of war in Robert's attack, the enemy's effective strength was actually only 10, annihilated within minutes. After shooting the last person, Robert stood up. The 500 rounds of ammunition he originally brought were almost all used up. It's really not that difficult. I feel like this Hydra is not as strong as the regular German army. No wonder it only dares to engage in some shameful things. Due to Robert's participation in the battle that was supposed to last for an hour or two ended very quickly. Leaving the high ground that was useless after the enemy was eliminated, when Robert appeared in the military camp below, the scene immediately erupted into loud cheers. At first, Robert did not hide his figure, so he approached the base controlled by American prisoners of war in such a swagger. "Hey, who is that? I don't know, it's too far away to see clearly. Maybe it's an enemy. How about we shoot him?" A group of captive American soldiers who were the first to discover the abnormality pointed their guns at the people at the door like frightened birds. "Hey, do you remember? The man who rescued us just now said that the Hell Messenger also participated in this battle." As more and more U.S. troops observed abnormalities at the door, a person suddenly reminded them just as they were about to shoot the suspicious person. "Yes, there are messengers from Hell joining the battle, so I wonder why those German troops fell in droves." I also remembered that when I was fighting with a guard just now, he was suddenly shot in the head. I thought it was one of you who helped me. Look at the German troops underground. Most of them are shot in the head with one shot. This is exactly the fighting style of the Hell Messenger. I was lucky enough to fight with him. The US military who finally came to their senses began to gradually put down their guns, but some of the more vigilant ones still opened the safety and were ready to shoot at any time. That person who has seen the Nazi nemesis, go up and confirm. An obviously higher-ranking American prisoner of war ordered the last person to speak. After all, he was behind the German army. The soldier who was called just hesitated and went because there were so many people behind him and he couldn't disobey orders. Robert was a little surprised. Why were the people from the 107th Regiment on the opposite side still waiting there, rushing out before the other party could react? Are they still waiting here to be surrounded? After waiting in place for a few seconds, Robert saw that the prisoners of war still had no intention of taking a step forward. He looked at their wary eyes and patted his head. Oh, how could they forget that they can't even see me with their eyesight? Knowing that it was his negligence, Robert ran over in a few steps and met a soldier who came to explore the way. Lieutenant Robert, is that really you? I can't believe you are standing so close in front of me. We fought together at Highland 465, remember? Can you sign your name for me? As soon as the soldier who captured and explored the path approached Robert, he realized that it was really the messenger from hell that he admired, and he immediately said a lot of words. Robert and I are here to rescue you together with the captain, but we are not out of danger yet. Let's talk about these things after we break out of the German position. Soldier. Oh, okay. Then Robert and the soldier came to the American prisoners of war in the base. Now everyone had put down their guns, because there was more than one person who knew Robert, but they just didn't say anything. Kyle Gold, thank you for saving my life, Lieutenant Robert. But I think it's not the time to talk now, it's better to break out before the other party can react. Robert was the first to meet the most prestigious man among the prisoners of war. This can be seen from the fact that he stood at the front of the team and the other soldiers looked at him. Finally, I met someone who understands. The leader among the prisoners of war had this kind of consciousness, which also saved Robert a lot of words. You're right, Kyle, now take your soldiers and take over all the German equipment outside, especially those tanks, to see who can drive them. As soon as Robert finished speaking, several people raised their hands and said that they could drive these tanks. Out of respect for Kyle, Robert did not directly intervene in the management of the prisoners of war. You guys wait for me outside for 15 minutes. Boom. Before Robert could finish speaking, a violent explosion occurred at the German base in front of him. He quickly lay down to avoid being injured by the shock wave. The entire explosion lasted for 5 minutes. Robert lay on the ground and waited for the explosion to subside before he raised his head and looked at the building not far away that was full of oppression just now, but now turned into a sea of flames. Robert looked at his feet and felt lucky. Fortunately, the Red Skull didn't plant a bomb on the ground outside the base, otherwise he would have been able to play with it. I guess we don't have to wait for you outside now, right? Kyle looked at the blown-up Hydra base. Even though he had just gotten up from the ground and there was still a lot of dust on his face, he still remained optimistic. Really no need. Robert waved to Captain America, who was walking out of the sea of fire, and waved back to Carl. Captain America supported his friend and walked towards him. When he approached, his expression was extremely solemn. Cap, I guess we need to get back soon. I made a terrible discovery. Robert, then let's go back to the base. He didn't ask what it was that made Steve so solemn. It wasn't that Robert wasn't curious, but that he knew. It's nothing more than some Hydra bases and the plan to destroy most of the world. Single quote. Don't you have anything to ask? On the way back, Captain America looked around to prevent enemies from appearing, and said to Robert on the other side. I will know what I should know sooner or later, but it is useless to think about what I shouldn't know. Robert was beside Captain America and answered Steve's question nonchalantly. What he said was extremely perfunctory, not because he did it intentionally but because something attracted his attention. Is there something going on? Captain America looked at Robert, who instantly picked up the weapon and took aim. He also realized what happened, so he quickly picked up the shield and said. In Robert's sight, there was a large group of dark figures, at least 1,000 people, and among them there were no less than 20 tanks and armored vehicles. Robert, who originally thought that following Captain America would be protected by the protagonist's halo, had not replenished his ammunition at all after fighting the first wave, and now he only had less than 100 bullets left. The captain asked everyone to form a defense on the spot. Another battle is coming. Robert secretly thought, careless, this was on the battlefield. Perhaps the recent actions were so smooth that he got a little carried away. Sometimes he even ignored the problem that he would die and played the battlefield like a game. Attention everyone, if there are enemies ahead, stop immediately and form a defensive formation. Captain America hasn't reacted yet, or he has no command experience yet, but Kyle is obviously not a commander who just went to the battlefield. He reacted immediately after Robert discovered the situation. There are hundreds of U.S. military prisoners of war in total. The battle at the Hydra base just now did not cost them much. In addition, they now have high-tech weapons manufactured by Hydra using the Tesseract, and their chances of winning are undoubtedly high. A minute later, Robert could clearly see the enemy troops without the help of a sniper scope. There were thousands of them, but they were all in a hurry-moving posture. The prisoner of war soldiers who had already hidden themselves had all opened their safety guards and could launch an attack with just one order. Stop. A commander in the German army noticed something strange and immediately stopped advancing. After all, there were hundreds of American prisoners of war, and the time was short. In addition, they were driving big tanks made by Hydra. As long as they were not human, you can see even if you are blind. There are enemies ahead. The leading German commander had a blood hole on his head, which was the bullet fired by Robert's sniper rifle. Bang, 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 3 consecutive shots, and Robert's extremely fast reloading shocked everyone around him. You must know that this is not just fast, but one person falls down every time a shot is fired. Attack. Kyle was not an ink-spotting person either. After experiencing a brief surprise towards Robert, he made a decisive decision and launched an attack while the enemy was not yet stable and the front of the team was even a little confused. The American team also followed the charging team to attack, and Robert was the only one left. He had very few bullets, so he was unable to achieve sustained firepower output. He can only try his best to find high-value targets, which means that he is not the protagonist of this battle. It's our turn to perform. Come on, baby. Give the fool opposite you a big surprise. The tank captured from Hydra emitted the excited sounds of the U.S. military driving it. This was all because the blue energy cannon fired by their tank could instantly devour the enemy on the opposite side without having to reload. The 2 Hydra tanks took the lead in the battle. They were indeed weapons made with the power of infinite raw stones. Even though the energy they carried may not even be 1/1000th of that of the raw stones, they were still able to knock out an enemy German tank with one shot. The 2 tanks destroyed the enemy's armored force within 10 minutes, at the cost of only losing 1 Hydra tank. In the infantry battle, the American team was also killing everyone. The weapons in the hands of the American prisoners of war were several levels higher than those in the hands of the Germans. Coupled with Robert's cold shots from time to time, the situation on the battlefield was almost a direct confrontation. It is developing in a one-sided direction. At the U.S. military rear base, Colonel Phillips' face was surprisingly gloomy at this time, but he still had to read what he considered a report. Congressman Brandt, I regret to report to you that Captain Steve Rogers disappeared behind enemy lines on the 3rd of this month. Aerial reconnaissance found nothing. At this point, I regret to announce that Captain Steve Rogers was unfortunately killed in action. At this time, Carter appeared outside the command tent and happened to hear the contents of the report. There was no expression on her face. Another telegram was sent to the president's office, saying that Captain Robert disappeared behind enemy lines with Captain Steve on the 3rd of this month. The reconnaissance plane has not yet found any trace. It is temporarily determined that he is missing or. Speaking of this, Philip fell silent. He thought of the subordinate he loved very much. He turned around unconsciously and found Carter standing outside the tent. Only then did Philip squeeze out the words through his teeth. It is temporarily determined that he is missing or dead. He will not be able to participate in the award ceremony held this month. Carter noticed Philip's angry look, but she still reported the latest situation. The last aerial reconnaissance has returned and still has not been found. When he heard the first half of the sentence, Philip picked up the investigation report with the last glimmer of hope, but after discovering that there was still no news, he couldn't help but throw the report in his hand on the table. "Corporal, go make some coffee." "Corporal." "Yes, sir." Philip was furious now. It was the woman named Carter beside him who caused him to completely lose hundreds of soldiers and the Nazi nemesis for whom he had high hopes. Before training people, Philip still considered Carter's face and deliberately pushed away the corporal who had just sent the telegram until he left. Only Philip and Carter were left in the command tent. "I can't touch Howard Stark. He is rich and is our main supplier of weapons, but you are not." Faced with Philip's reprimand, Carter still insisted. "I don't regret my decision, sir. I'm sure Steve and Robert feel the same way." "Philip, do you think I care what you think? I once trusted you so much, but now America's national treasures and heroes and other soldiers have died in battle, just because." When he said this, Philip paused, then looked at Carter's face and said without mercy, "Just because you like Steve, you let our hero Nazi nemesis accompany him on his adventure, just to give the national treasure a greater chance of proving himself, right?" "Carter, I am sticking to the faith in my heart and have absolute confidence in them." Faced with her stubborn look, Philip gritted his teeth and threatened, "When your department is abolished, I hope you can still stay optimistic." The conversation between the two fell into silence. Carter had a firm expression, while Philip had an angry look. What broke it all was the exclamation of the soldiers outside. "Look, who are those people? Can't they be enemies?" The person who said this was quickly refuted by his companions. "Didn't you see the US military uniforms they were wearing? Besides, how dare the Germans come here so arrogantly? Hey, I know some of these people, they are from the 107th Regiment. I saw it too, that's the messenger of hell, he's back. Let me see, let me see. It's him, it's really him, the messenger of hell, he has created a miracle again." The increasingly loud shouting outside successfully attracted Philip's attention. "What happened to the guard?" "Guard, sir, they seem to be saying that Captain Robert and Captain Steve are back." "Philip, what?" After hearing the news, Philip walked out of the tent in 3 or 2 steps. Carter beside him was not slow to react. She was even faster and even walked in front of Philip. At the gate of the U.S. military base, Philip saw the return of the prisoners of war led by Robert and Steve through the gap deliberately made by the surrounding soldiers. "Philip, I knew how this kid could die. He is a myth." Carter stood next to her. She, who had always been strong, was rarely red-eyed at this moment. Philip, who was beside him, also realized that she had been under too much pressure recently. At this moment, after seeing Robert and most of the soldiers of the 107th Regiment return safely, his eyes most of the anger could not help but disappear. "Philip, I think your persistence may be right sometimes." He couldn't do it to apologize to Carter, but there was nothing wrong with expressing his apology in a tactful way. At this time, Steve also walked up to Philip. After saluting him, he solemnly said, "Some brothers need treatment, and I voluntarily accept all punishments." Philip looked at him and hadn't spoken yet. Robert said behind him, "Colonel, Captain Steve and I did this together. I should be punished as well." Robert's words made Captain America look at him, which included many emotions, such as sincerity, trust, touching, etc. In short, Captain America regarded him as a friend. However, what he said in return was a big look from Philip. Philip did not want to punish his beloved general, and this was only after the other party had performed meritorious deeds. "Philip, forget it." After he finished speaking, he glanced at Robert, with an obvious meaning, that is, follow him. Separating themselves from the crowd, Philip and Robert walked one after another until a long time later. "I don't want the same thing to happen again. The Nazi nemesis cannot have too high a risk of death. I hope you can understand this." "Yes, sir, I promise there won't be a next time." No matter what the superior says, just give a positive answer. This is the experience of Robert's 2 generations. Very good. The president has said that he will make you a U.S. military hero like Captain America. That will be of great help to our morale. How about you go to Washington on the 17th of this month to receive the medal personally awarded by the president? Follow your instructions. An extremely firm answer. No one knows how perfunctory Robert was in his heart. He was just dealing with his superiors now. What he wanted had always been power. He had no interest in the medal of the United States at all. Hey, let's cheer for Captain America. There was a loud shout in the distance, and even Philip and Robert, who were far away from the crowd, could clearly hear it. Woo! Captain America! Long live Captain America! The shouts one after another made Philip look surprised. He looked at Steve, who was surrounded by the U.S. military, and asked Robert. Has he always been so high profile? Robert, maybe you could ask him in person. On the 17th, in Washington, the capital of the United States, the President of the United States held a press conference at the White House to personally award the Medal of Valor and the more precious Medal of Honor, which is almost proof of the highest achievement of American military personnel. Now I invite my good friends, Steve and Robert, to come up to the stage to receive the Medal of Honor for Valor and the highest honor. The President gave a passionate speech on the stage. He didn't know much about Steve. He only knew that he was an enhanced soldier created through the super serum. Even the President of the United States didn't know how strong he was. It's not that he can't know, but he doesn't want to. After all, people's energy is limited. He is already so busy dealing with various things every day that he has no time to pay attention to Steve. He only has one victory. But Robert was different. As the President of the United States, this hell messenger had been a close friend of his for a long time. How many times had he wanted to take the time to meet this legendary figure, but he had been unable to do so because of the tense war on the front lines. Compared to Steve and Team America, who currently have very few records, Robert's current record is astonishing. Anyone who sees or hears his heroic deeds that are almost ready to be published will be amazed and admired. Captain Steve, Captain Robert. But what was embarrassing was that the two protagonists did not show up even after the President shouted twice. It was not until someone quickly came on stage and said something in his ear that he hurriedly ended the awarding ceremony. Mr. President, Captain Steve reported a plan about Hydra. They are crazy about destroying the entire world, including Washington. After the Pentagon's study, it was decided to let the captain and Captain Robert lead the team to stop this, so their plane changed its route and did not arrive in Washington, but went to other places. The President of the United States walked in front angrily, and his secretary explained the reason behind the matter. However, the President was not that easy to fool, and he asked straight to the point. Why didn't I get the news before? I don't even know anything, and I'm like a fool conferring medals on two American heroes who never show up. Secretary, maybe the Pentagon generals didn't consider this issue. Before he finished speaking, the President blushed and said in an extremely angry tone, "What would those old foxes have thought of? They just saw that I have no advantage in the next election and decided to add insult to injury. I guess they are being friendly at the moment. On the phone with the future president. They just want to take this opportunity to eliminate the possibility of my re-election. Just wait for these old guys, they'd better pray that I really won't be re-elected." A dark political battle is taking place in Washington, and the outgoing president's fury has nothing to do with Steve and Robert. The fifth is in Poland, near the Baltic Sea, and the sixth is located approximately a few dozen miles west of the Maginot Line. The captain at the moment was in a U.S. military underground base in a city near the front line. He marked on the map their plan that he saw in the Hydra base that day. The marked map was taken away, and Carter stood opposite Steve, while Robert held a cup of coffee and tried not to miss the next step of the American team. What I marked on the map was only the approximate location. I just glanced at it and saw these. Carter, that's pretty good. You have to know that even the most perfect people will sometimes fall short of what they want. Robert raised his eyebrows and realized that he seemed a bit redundant, so in order not to appear out of place, he leaned towards Major Philip. Oh no, it was Major General Philip. Captain America. This is the arsenal we know about. Barnes said that Hydra sent all the parts to a place that is not on the map. Philip. Agent Carter, notify the British intelligence agency and ask all allies to set out to search for that place. We must take the initiative to alert the enemy and make the Red Skull and John Smith jump over the wall. How about Captain, do you think we can catch all Hydra in one go? Steve glanced at Carter beside him, and in his encouraging eyes he said firmly. Yes, sir, but I need manpower. Philip, we are already selecting the best warriors. Captain America. Yes, actually I already have someone selected. It seemed that Robert the airman was finally noticed at this time. Captain America now looked at him with an expectant expression, and Major General Philip also set his sights here. Robert. I'm fine, Captain America. Phew, thanks bro. Philip. I hope you will end the battle as soon as possible. We need you on the frontline battlefield. Robert. Yes General, I promise that this operation will be completed as quickly as possible. Philip waved his hand, indicating that they could leave. Robert and Captain America looked at each other and walked not far away. Robert. I guess there won't be just the two of us in this elite team, right? Steve was in a great mood now that he was being reused, and he couldn't help but joke. At the moment, we are, but I feel like we can complete the task very well, right? Come on, Captain, that will be very tiring. I suggest you consider asking for more people. Robert also cooperated and made a scared expression. Captain America. Then to make it easier for you, I'm going to recruit elites. After the captain said hello to Carter, he went about recruiting the most suitable team members in his mind. Carter looked at the high-spirited man, and she couldn't help but smile with relief at this moment. Agent Carter, I would like to interrupt you. Can you follow me over there? After the rightful owner left, Robert immediately prepared to implement his own little plan, although it was just to satisfy his current selfish desires. Carter. Okay. Carter was obviously a little confused about Robert's sudden departure, but she didn't think much about it and followed Robert to a secluded corner. Such an environment made Carter, an agent, instinctively uneasy, but out of her trust in Robert, she did not leave, but asked. Is there a problem? Looking at Carter, who was only one body away from him, his angel-like face made Robert's heart suddenly burst into flames. Carter, do you still remember the promise we made? Carter thought he had some important information that he could only tell himself, but he didn't expect Robert to mention this. Carter, who was still a little naive at this time, thought Robert's request was to return to New York or something. After all, this was the psychological hint Robert had given her before. Of course I remember. Before Carter could say the next words, she saw a shadow running toward her body at an extremely fast speed, and then she felt something thrust into her body. Well, as soon as Carter came to his senses, he pushed Robert out, who suddenly kissed him. What are you doing? At this moment, her face was rosy and she was staring at Robert with an angry expression. Perhaps because there were many people not far from the corner, Carter was deliberately restraining his voice. Tisk, tisk. Smashing his mouth, Robert thought about the taste of Carter just now. It's boring, he said to himself, and Robert, who had long expected Carter to be angry, quickly explained. This is my condition. It's within the scope of your ability, and it doesn't violate my principles. Pooh, Carter spat fiercely on the ground. Although she was angry now, she was far from losing her mind. When you said you wouldn't violate your principles, you didn't add the word me. Apparently she was not satisfied with Robert's answer. Things have happened. As soon as Robert said these stupid words, he saw that Carter was already preparing to draw his gun. There was no plan to deal with this situation in his plan. However, Robert, who had a strong desire to survive and was afraid that he would follow the captain to contact the Tesseract, plan and fail, quickly came to his senses and said. Don't get excited. I know you like Steve, but haven't you two confirmed your relationship yet? Carter obviously didn't expect him to say that. She couldn't help but fall into deep thought and subconsciously lowered her hand that was about to hold the gun. There's a show. Seeing that there is something to be done, Robert hurriedly said. You haven't confirmed your relationship yet, so for me, who likes Carter, this is just a way to pursue you. It's like when I was a kid, I had a crush on a girl, and I always liked to tease her to attract her attention. It's the same now. I use my way to attract your attention. No matter you think it's childish or whatever, but I want you to know that it's Carter. After a tactical pause, Robert prepared to use a big move to temporarily stun Carter so that he could have a chance to escape. Robert believed that Carter, who had calmed down afterward, would definitely weigh the pros and cons, and there must be a key character, Philip, who could not be bypassed. You must know that this powerful Major General held Robert in high regard. Carter, does he know the scene when I saw you for the first time? It was a cloudy day, and I was in the same mood at that time. But when you appeared, I seemed to see a beam of light, and you were the angel standing in the light, making everyone who saw it couldn't help but want to get close to you. That's when I fell in love with you." Quote. Robert spoke passionately, but Carter was indifferent on the other side. He knew that the only way to solve the problem now was to be miserable. "I know you dismiss what I said. Do you know what it feels like to kill 100 or more people every day? To be honest, it's painful. That's not 100 chickens. Before I met you, I had been there all living in suffering." As he spoke, Robert squeezed out 2 tears for himself. The 2 tears just blocked the cold light flashing in his eyes. He was already prepared to deal the worst blow to Carter for exposing his behavior on the spot. Then Robert's plan to get close to Steve would be in vain. Robert, who thought he had put in a lot of effort, would never allow this to happen. But fortunately, the worst-case scenario in Robert's fantasy did not appear. Perhaps it was his tears that made Kurt relent. Or maybe she had calmed down and weighed the pros and cons. Anyway, she waved her hand expressionlessly for Robert to leave. Walking out of this underground U.S. military intelligence base in a busy city block, Robert took a deep breath. The thrill of kissing Carter just now has disappeared over time, and when the passion passes, what is often left is only regret and fear. Robert doesn't regret it now, but he is a little scared. He is really afraid that Carter will lose his mind because he was taken advantage of. Robert, who originally didn't plan to stay in the world of 1943 for too long, didn't pay much attention to it. In the afternoon, Steve made a special trip to a bar in the city, where there were several outstanding soldiers from the 107th Regiment, all of whom were invited by the U.S. team. "Come on, we just escaped from that place and you want us to go back again?" When the captain proposed it just now, some people opposed it, but several people at the scene seemed to disagree with him. "I think it's good. I'm excited just thinking about being able to fight with the Nazi nemesis and Captain." "I think it's okay too." Captain America saw that 2 people had expressed their opinions and couldn't help but keep scanning their eyes. "Count me in. I'll join in too." When Captain America's eyes rested on a black soldier, he didn't say he refused or agreed, but asked the captain to do something for him. "Black man, you can make me work hard, but Captain, you have to do something for me." Steve frowned. He obviously wouldn't pay too much for this, but he still planned to ask before things became clear. "Steve, can you tell me what it is? I hope it's within the scope of my ability." However, he still took the vaccination in advance to prevent the soldier lion from making random demands. "Black man, yes, you can do it. My condition is that you have to buy me another drink." As he spoke, he handed the empty cup in front of Steve. Captain America obviously didn't expect that his request was so simple. When he realized it, he couldn't help but smile. "No problem, mate. That's not too much to ask." Captain America smiled, picked up his glass and walked towards the bar. "Please give me another glass of wine as a thank you." Can he really drink again? In the shocked tone of the waiter, Steve refilled his glass of wine and brought it to the black man, who kept his promise and immediately expressed his willingness to continue fighting with him. After taking care of the other members of the elite team, Steve was in a good mood. He couldn't help but walk to the other candidate who was the most certain one in his mind. "James, let me guess which fools agreed to serve you on the battlefield again." He had a teasing tone, and he might be a little unhappy if the captain was replaced by someone else, but the current person was James Barnes, one of his best friends. "Captain America. Then are you willing to go on an adventure with the biggest fool?" "James, come on. That little guy from New York never runs away. I have to watch him." His words undoubtedly made Captain America feel gratified. In fact, it has always been his dream to fight alongside this friend. Robert sat in the corner, holding a glass of red wine in his hand, taking a sip from time to time. It felt really wonderful. "It would be great if I could have another plate of fried peanuts." Captain America brought James over, and Robert couldn't sit still anymore, so he naturally stood up and went up to him and asked, "How is the recruitment of the team? Do you need me to ask General Phillip for some people?" Steve coughed, and the people who had just agreed to fight alongside him all looked over. There were 5 people in total, plus James, 6 in total. These are all elites in the 107th Regiment. Robert has seen them before. Captain America was very satisfied with the personnel he had recruited, so he confidently replied to Robert's question. Obviously without General Phillips' help, our team was actually formed just now. Dang, dang. The sound of high heels hitting the ground came from outside the tavern. As the owner of the sound walked into the house, almost everyone turned their attention to her. Carter made a stunning appearance in a red dress. Her hot figure was finally no longer hidden by the military uniform and looked so dazzling against the dress. However, among the many gazes, Robert was the only one who looked away. Although he was not afraid of anything, the act of forcibly kissing Carter yesterday was already the limit. If he did any more excessive actions, he was really afraid of affecting the development of the plot. It may affect his ability to contact the Tesseract and prevent him from being frozen until the 21st century. These 2 points alone make Robert afraid to move. Agent Carter. Looking at Carter, who was walking straight towards him, Steve's eyes flashed with surprise. When he came to his senses, the man had already come closer, and he quickly said hello. Carter. Well, Captain, General Phillip asked me to ask you, have you recruited the people you want? Steve seems to prefer working on actions rather than words. Guys, should you get up and let our commander take a look at you? After Captain America's shout, all the people he had recruited stood up and looked at Captain America, even James was no exception. Carter. What about Mr. Nazi Nemesis? Why are you still sitting here? I remember you promised the captain yesterday. After Carter entered the house, Robert ran back to the corner where he had just been. He wanted to reduce his presence as much as possible, but it seemed that they were not planning to let him go. At this time, Captain America didn't think it was a big deal that Robert didn't stand up. On the contrary, Carter's tone of voice when speaking was not very good, which made him a little worried. Captain America. Yes, Robert promised me yesterday. I think I remembered it correctly, right? Fortunately, although Carter was a little strange today, Robert was very normal. When Captain America looked at him, he stood up and said firmly, "Of course, I actually think that as a veteran who joined this team yesterday, I have the right not to stand up." Making a joke at the right time, Robert also wanted to lighten the atmosphere. Ha ha ha. Of course, you are actually qualified just as a Nazi nemesis. There's nothing wrong with that, I mean really. Robert's joke was still accepted by others. With his prestige, the small group of soldiers who just joined took it for granted. Carter. I hope you really want to use your sense of superiority and are not afraid of doing something bad. However, someone didn't seem to give him much face. Carter spoke again and brought down the atmosphere of the scene. Carter, what's wrong with you today? Did something happen? Captain America seemed to notice something was wrong. At this time, Robert looked down at his wine glass. He didn't know what Carter was doing, but there was no doubt that if she dared to do something inappropriate, Robert would not hesitate to stop her. Deal with her before making it. Robert, who was currently staring at the wine glass, was calculating in his mind how likely it was to disguise this kind of thing as an accident. Carter. It's okay, I was just joking with Robert. Robert, you won't be angry because of this, right? A smile finally broke out on her expressionless face. People who didn't know it really thought she was joking, but Robert knew that she was knocking him. He had to pay for the sins he had done no matter what, so Robert, who was already in the wrong, immediately said after hearing Carter's words that he would not be angry about this matter. I almost thought something unpleasant happened between you two, but it turns out it was just a joke. The atmosphere at the scene became active again, and Steve breathed a sigh of relief. Carter. It's nothing unpleasant. It was just a joke. By the way, Rogers, I'm here to remind you to remember to write down a list of your team so that I can report it and coordinate the efforts of all parties. When it comes to business, Captain America is always very serious. Yes, sir. Well, also, when you and Robert go to Howard tomorrow morning, he has already polished your weapon. As for Robert's knife, he has also made it. It seems that she has a deep grudge against me. Robert noticed that Carter's words offended him, but he had no way to resolve this problem except letting him disappear quietly, at least that was an option for now. That's done, now let's talk about the topic between us. In front of everyone, Carter took a step forward. Just with her pair of strengths, she was on par with Captain America. While making such a bold move, she glanced in Robert's direction intentionally or unintentionally. When Carter found out that the boy who had promised her yesterday that he liked her was indifferent to her closeness to Captain America, she felt uncomfortable for no reason. Carter, what's wrong? Captain America took a step back and avoided Carter's move to get close again. Perhaps this was due to his incomprehensible amorous feelings. No longer looking at Robert, Carter withdrew her gaze and stared at Steve not far away. Don't you think what I wear looks good for dancing? Barnes, yeah, but I guess you need a dance partner. At this time, before Captain America could say anything, his good brother took the lead. Obviously, few people can remain calm when facing such a charming person as Carter. Carter, I'm short of a dance partner. Captain, are you willing to fill this position after this operation? He directly ignored James Barnes and Carter, and used his words to ask the American team. The U.S. team, who was in a state of confusion, also quickly reacted. Yes, I do. He just didn't understand the style, and he was a little shy but not stupid. This time he surprisingly heard another layer of Carter's meaning. That's a deal, Captain America. It's a deal. Robert, who had remained as silent as possible from beginning to end, had been staring at the glass of wine in his hand in the corner. Carter took a deep look at him before leaving. James, I seem to be ignored, just like you did last time in New York. Captain America. Don't worry, buddy, you will meet the right one in the future. Robert also came over at this time and said, Agent Carter likes the captain. Even this blind man can see it. There is definitely no chance for us. After Carter left, everything in the tavern returned to normal, and Robert no longer needed to hide from anyone, so he naturally came to Captain America and spoke to James. Depending on the situation, it should be. James is also an open-minded person. Besides, even if he really fell in love with Carter, regardless of whether the other party would agree, he would not be able to touch him even if Captain America liked this. This is obviously much better than Robert. If Captain America knew that one of his best friends would forcefully kiss his sweetheart, he didn't know how he would react. Robert Betty, James Barnes, nice to meet you, come and toast to our acquaintance. Captain America looked at his two good friends and smiled sincerely. Needless to say, James helped him when he was at his weakest. And Robert also helped Steve when everyone thought he was a joker, and also accompanied Team America to prove himself. The U.S. team is grateful to these two people with sincere friendship, and Steve feels that he will always remember their help. When Robert and Steve arrived at the agreed-upon location in the early morning of the next day, they found that the door was closed, and there was a woman sitting at the door reading a newspaper. Robert gave Steve a look to tell him to ask, and he stood as far away as possible, because if the plot was correct. Steve, hello, excuse me, we're looking for Howard. He's not free now, just wait here. The woman said without raising her head. Suddenly she seemed to notice something. She looked at the newspaper carefully and then looked up at Captain America. Her attitude immediately changed. Oh, I know you from the newspaper. Her tone lost the arrogance it had just now, and now it was a seductive tone. Just this made Steve at a loss. Looking at the woman approaching step by step, Captain America was forced to the corner of the table. He was so nervous that he didn't even know how to put his hands, so he simply put them on his chest. Captain America. What did the newspapers say about me? I think it was positive, right? Yes, it's quite positive. I think all women in the United States should thank you for this, but they happen to not be here, so I can only do it. As she said that, she had already kissed Steve. How had Captain America ever seen this before? Coupled with the fact that he was her admirer and those warm lips, Steve was completely smitten. Why are you standing here? Come in. Robert was watching the show from a distance, but suddenly Carter's voice sounded behind him, as if he had been caught doing something bad. He turned around quickly and moved to hide something. What are you doing? Carter didn't expect Robert to have such a big reaction, so she asked subconsciously, perhaps out of annoyance to him, but her tone was cold. I haven't been standing for a long time, my legs are a little numb, hiss. As he spoke, he also pulled his thigh, as if it was exactly what he said. Idiot, can't you come up and knock on the door? Forget it, go in. The knife Howard made for you is ready. Carter's tone was still a little stiff, but his words contained a certain amount of concern, although not much. Maybe I'm just being too sentimental. Nodding to Carter, Robert planned to go in. When he was about to pass by him, she seemed to remember something. Wait, didn't the captain come with you? Well, here, but I just went to the toilet and should be there soon. Robert had just made an excuse to cover up Captain America, but he didn't expect that he would be slapped in the face so quickly the next second. As soon as Robert finished speaking, a woman's moan sounded from around the corner, which happened to be the direction where Captain America was. What happened? Carter looked at Robert with doubtful eyes. I think Howard must have been waiting for a long time. I think I have to go in first. With the philosophy that a dead Taoist friend should never die a poor Taoist, Robert, who thought he had done enough, hurriedly evacuated the fire scene that was about to break out. Steve, Carter's shocked voice sounded behind Robert, followed by a loud slap. Snapped. There is no doubt that this slap was on Captain America's face, but Robert was a little surprised because if he remembered correctly, Carter in the original time and space had lightly revealed this matter. Could it be that the captain has progressed so quickly that he has already passed the stage of kissing and started to take the next step? Robert thought evilly as he hurriedly left the place of right and wrong. Howard. What happened outside? Why did I seem to hear Carter's angry voice? Did someone mess with her? Robert. Maybe. I think we should not pay attention to these and let's look at the weapons. Howard was obviously a bit gossipy. He looked behind Robert and found that he couldn't see the scene of the incident and could only nod. Howard. Okay, let me show you the weapons I made specially for you. After saying that, he took Robert to a table covered with cloth. It's quite mysterious. Robert wanted to open it himself, but Howard stopped him. He said that it was his own hard work and he had to open it himself. Okay, then open it. Robert withdrew his hand and waited for Howard's performance. Then I am honored to show you one of my most satisfying works at the moment, Hell's Blade. He pulled open the covering cloth and revealed what was inside. It was a sword that was covered in silver light. There were not many decorations on it. Apart from a pattern carved on the handle, it could be said that there was no decoration. But he didn't know what Robert saw. I fell in love with it instantly. Howard. Due to time constraints, I haven't had time to paint it yet, but I feel that the way it looks now is already very good. It's cool to have a knife made of that kind of super metal. As he spoke, he picked up the knife, waved it awkwardly twice in front of Robert, and then slashed it horizontally onto the table in front of him. The inch-long wooden table where the blade passed was like paper, and was easily cut into two pieces. Its power is not only that, it can split any object if it is powerful enough, but its super material hardness also means that it will not collapse or break. As if realizing that he had said too much, Howard, an arms dealer and scientist, added. At least nothing found today can damage it. Even to unseal it, I used the best quality diamonds to grind it. You know, it took a lot of money. At first, Robert stood aside and listened to his introduction, thinking that he just wanted to brag about the weapons he had made, but as he went on, he felt more and more something was wrong. He always felt that Howard was trying to say something behind the scenes. The two of them looked at each other and instantly seemed to understand something, and both laughed. Robert, you don't have to do this. As long as I have any conditions, you can make them. He also knows now that people are asking for reward from him. Robert doesn't care, because this is what he should do. As long as he has what he can afford, he is willing to exchange it. Howard, it has to be subtle. I thought I had to be more explicit. You know I'm a businessman. I have almost all the money you have. Feeling that he was talking too much, Howard added. Or you can have it when you want to, but there is something about you that I can't have. With a raised eyebrow, Robert realized what that thing was, and he knew that Howard wanted to use his power. He liked the knife made of vibranium very much, but that didn't mean that he was willing to give up his freedom for Howard to use. I really like this weapon, but losing my freedom for this is something I have never thought about, and I will never agree to it. He said the precautionary words first to avoid Howard making some excessive demands. Howard, don't worry, man, I never thought about it that way. All I want is your 3 shots, within the scope of ability without violating the principle. Why do you feel that this condition is inexplicably familiar? That's what Robert thought in his heart, but what Robert said was, I agree to your conditions, but there's nothing you can say to put your mind at ease. Let's sign a contract. Howard, it's best, then it's yours now. The moment Robert agreed, Howard handed him the weapon in his hand, took the vibranium knife and looked at it carefully. Dude, I think you didn't forget to make a scabbard for this knife, right? After all, if I carry it on my body without some protection, it will probably not be used to kill the enemy, but to hurt myself. As soon as Robert asked this question, an embarrassed look suddenly appeared on Howard's face. Finally, he faced Robert's doubtful eyes and said with some restraint, "This is another question I want to talk about. I have tried many materials for the scabbard, but in the end I found that because it is too sharp, neither genuine leather nor artificial materials can withstand the friction of the blade surface." Quote. Robert was a little dumbfounded, and he asked tentatively, "That is to say, Howard, cough, cough. I have already thought of a solution to the problem, which is to use magnetic fields to constrain it, but it will take some time." Robert, how long will that be? You have to know that no one has tried this before, and this is just a whim of mine. If I want to turn it into reality, I estimate it will take about 5 months. When Robert left Howard, he didn't get his weapon. Instead, he took out the beautiful Captain America shield. When Robert walked to the door, he looked carefully and found that Carter and Steve were not there before he walked out. It seems that the captain doesn't have time to come and get the shield, so I'll send it to him. Single quote. Hey, did you hear that? Agent Carter ran out crying. "Aw, what happened?" Agent is a strong person. "I heard that Steve was caught messing around with someone, which hurt Agent Carter's heart. I heard that she just asked Steve to be her dance partner yesterday." Along the way from the office area, Robert listened to a bag full of gossip. It turns out that gossip is a characteristic of people all over the world. After walking out of the underground base, Robert was on the street. Because it was not very far from the front line, there were no people on the street. This city was once occupied by the Nazis and a battle inevitably broke out when the US military captured it. Therefore, there were many ruins in some places not far away. Robert took Captain America's shield and walked back to his residence first. "I figured that even if I went to see Captain America now, he probably wouldn't have time, so I just waited until the afternoon to give him the shield." On the other side, Captain America is trying hard to explain to Carter. "Carter is actually not who you think. Carter, I've seen it all. Your hands have already been put into other people's clothes. Do you think I should believe you or my own eyes?" Captain America was speechless by Carter's question. He regretted his impulse just now, but suddenly he thought that Carter had never done anything to apologize to him. "What about you and Howard? You even made an appointment to have hot pot together during that operation. Do I have reason to suspect that there is something going on between you?" Carter, who obviously didn't expect the captain to ask this question, was a little confused when she was asked, but when she reacted, she felt an unspeakable anger, but suddenly Robert's face appeared in front of her eyes, which made her angry. The condensed momentum was released. "You disappoint me so much, Steve, you don't understand women at all." After saying this, Carter left without looking back. She comforted herself in her heart and said, "It was not my fault, it was Robert who kissed her lightly, and Steve was the betrayer, he was willing to cheat." Looking at Carter's leaving figure, Steve, who had been so excited just now, suddenly calmed down. At this time, he really wanted to slap himself, not only because he failed to control himself just now, but also because he said hurtful words. "Dang dang, please come in." When Robert knocked on the door of Captain America's room in the afternoon, there was an immediate response from the door. When he pushed the door open and walked in, he saw Captain America, who was already fully dressed. "I went to see Howard. He said he gave you the shield. I guess you will bring it to me, so I'll wait here." There was no longer the usual smile on his face now, and Robert could even hear the feeling of being upset in his tone. "Well, I think I need some time alone now, so I put the shield here." Putting the shield on the nearby table, Robert wanted to leave first and wait for Captain America to be quiet for a while, etc. When he was about to walk out of the door, Captain America suddenly shouted from behind. Then Robert turned around and found that he had picked up the shield. "Colonel Phillip just sent someone to inform me that a Hydra base has been found. I think it's time for us to set off. Robert, happy to accompany you." This time, Captain America finally has a smile on his face. Although it's not the same as before, it's still a smile. He picked up the mask and put it on his face. His eyes were quick and firm, and he waved to Robert. Let's go. Italian front. Captain America leads a team of 7 people including him. His mission is to assist the Allied forces who discovered Hydra bases to destroy those bases. As soon as any Hydra base is discovered, the US team will immediately lead the team. Robert is not far away from them with a gun to snipe the enemy. The speed of 30 per minute is still reserved mainly because he is afraid of the US. The team had no chance to perform. After sniping the last enemy, the US team had arrived outside Hydra's base. They were planting bombs, and Robert also came forward to help. Actually, I feel that this operation is easier than I thought. I can feel that both Hydra and the Nazis are a little weak. They are almost finished, Robert said while placing the bomb in the corner, but as soon as he finished speaking, the black man in charge of the security team said in shock next to him. Nazi nemesis, I actually have no doubts about what you said, but I think that was before we killed the big guy. Following his gaze, Robert saw a behemoth that was nearly 5 times larger than a normal tank approaching from a short distance away. As it continued to approach, the ground shook violently. That's a big guy. I guess it won't be a big problem if you fire a cannonball at it from the outside. I think its purpose is to be controlled by someone, right? Captain America. Robert is right, it definitely needs someone to control it, and we can't destroy it from the outside, so let's start from the inside. At this time, Captain America is no longer as depressed as he was after breaking up with Carter 2 months ago. It is said that he is frustrated in love and successful in his career, and his current situation is similar. Robert, give me the unplanted bomb you have. Captain America rushed towards the giant tank with high explosives. The enemy inside was rushed forward by the captain before they had time to react. He rushed to the top of the tank in a few steps, opened the tank's entry hatch, and threw the activated explosives forward. As the desperate voices of the Hydra soldiers sounded inside, Captain America jumped out of the tank. Boom! There was a muffled sound of huge amounts, and the giant tank was destroyed. Then the US team ordered to destroy the Hydra base and then evacuate, because they were now in the hinterland of Germany, and the Allies had not yet fully controlled it. If they stayed for a long time, they might be in big trouble. Later, when the German army retook this place, the leader of Hydra, Red Skull, appeared here. You disappoint me so much. What he said with an angry expression on his ugly face was terrifying no matter how you looked at it. We were going to launch an earth-shattering attack to occupy the whole world, but there has been no progress, just because you can't even defeat a fool with a shield and a guy who can only fire hidden guns. Facing the anger of the Red Skull, Dr. Zola was terrified. He was really afraid that this madman would kill him in the next second. Zola, forgive me, I'm not good at this. I can only make weapons, not use them. Although the Red Skull is very angry now and wants to kill Zola, he also knows that this person is still valuable, so he can only resist the urge to kill. Speed up the progress, Doctor, before that Yankee kills you. Sir. At this time, 2 Hydra soldiers escorted the person in charge of the destroyed base up. In fact, he was able to survive until now entirely because he escaped after receiving the news, and now he was just captured. Sorry, Mr. Schmidt, we were wiped out. Before he finished speaking, the Red Skull killed him with 1 shot. It was a weapon developed by Tesseract. Its power directly destroyed the person in charge. Obviously now, after doing all this, the Red Skull left angrily, but Dr. Zola looked at his back and thought deeply. Halfway up a snow-capped mountain, Robert looked at the iron cables above his head and the railroad tracks below. He knew that his plan would succeed immediately. Remember when I let you ride the roller coaster at Coney Island? Captain America. I remember I almost vomited. You don't want to take revenge on me, do you? Regarding what Barnes said, Captain America smiled and said, why should I take revenge on you? The information is correct, Dr. Zola is on the incoming train. The Hydra dispatcher told him to go at full speed. No matter where he is going, it must be in a hurry. After the eavesdropper reported the situation, the US team quickly entered combat status. Robert, if the train isn't going very fast, I can try to snipe the driver. That's almost useless. Instead, it can easily cause the train to go out of control. Robert, just stay on top and observe the situation closely. Captain America is very familiar with Robert's combat habits. He knows that the Nazi nemesis likes to knock down enemies from a distance rather than engage in close combat. Captain America, who was absolutely confident in his own strength, immediately asked Robert to stay on top. Robert felt indifferent to this, but when his eyes glanced at James, he couldn't help but observe 3 seconds of silence for him. If I remember correctly, this man will be transformed into the Winter Soldier by Hydra in the future, and it will be him who kills Howard. The train is coming. He's very fast. A rapidly approaching train caught the team's sight, and Captain America, who already had rich combat experience, immediately ordered action. Then he took the lead in using the iron rope to slide down, followed by James and the black player who liked close combat. In 10 seconds, Captain America successfully climbed onto the roof of the train. He gave a hand signal to the black team member at the back, instructing him to take control of the front, and then went down the escalator on the train. Their plan was to use this to attract people. Hydra's attention in the car. In the carriage, Steve and James watched carefully, but did not see any shadow of the enemy. Bump. Suddenly, when Captain America stepped into another carriage, the doors of the 2 carriages quickly closed, and then the Hydra soldiers who had been ambushing appeared in the 2 carriages. On Team America's side is a heavily armed man, with 2 weapons powered by the power of the Rubik's Cube in his hands. Ben. As the sound of energy accumulation sounded, 2 groups of blue energy cannons hit Captain America. James's side was weaker than what the US team encountered. They were just 2 Hydra soldiers using ordinary weapons, but this could also make James miserable. Zola. Stop him. Keep shooting. He had already seen Captain America through the surveillance camera in the carriage. In panic, he hurriedly gave orders to the Hydra soldiers. On James's side, he had already defeated 2 people with his considerable strength, but what he didn't expect was that 3 more Hydra soldiers came to support him from other carriages, and he didn't have much ammunition at this time. The US team took advantage of the terrain and exerted its high mobility to defeat the big man. He was eager to save his friends and did not do a last-ditch attack or check whether the enemy had lost its combat effectiveness. What he did was to rush towards James's carriage, and happened to see the opponent's lack of ammunition. Captain America hurriedly opened the iron door and gave James a look. He immediately understood. When Captain America rushed forward to disrupt the enemy's sight, he stood up and shot the enemy. Captain America. It works well together. James. Of course. Ben. Before they could finish their words, the big man who had been defeated by Captain America made a sneak attack on the 2 of them. Captain America was blasted away by a direct shot, and his shield fell right at James's feet. Ben. Boom. The energy cannon hit the shield firmly. James was not Captain America. He didn't have that much strength, so he was knocked out instantly. It happened that the direction James flew out was where the train had just been broken and damaged. James. When Captain America saw his friend in danger, the small universe immediately exploded. He stood up and flew out with a shield, knocking down the Hydra man opposite him. James, grab my hand. James. Okay. Because the parts of the train were so damaged that it could not bear the weight of a person at all, James failed to grab Steve's outstretched hand and fell off the train, and underneath was the endless ice field. James. Steve watched helplessly as his friend fell, and he felt endless regret in his heart. He hated himself for not being able to save him, and he hated why he chose James to join this team in the first place. Robert. Captain Dr. Zola has been caught. Did something happen? When the team members successfully controlled the train and drove it into the Allied control area, Robert and the others boarded the train. One was to check for enemies that had not been eliminated, and the other was to look for Captain America, who had not appeared since the start of the operation. Robert was really scared at first. He was really afraid that one of his small actions would affect the plot and cause something unexpected to happen to the American team, and then he would lose the chance to be frozen. Although he now has far more strength than ordinary people, it does not mean that he can transcend time. Robert is still just a much stronger ordinary person, so frozen is his only chance to go to the 21st century. Everyone is afraid of death, and Robert is no exception. The reason why he insists on going to the 21st century is entirely because of the appearance of another Infinity Stone during that time period, which is time. What happened, Captain? Seeing that Captain America was fine, Robert knew that James had fallen off the train, but now he could only pretend to be unaware. Sitting slumped on the ground, Steve glanced at Robert, then looked at the damaged parts of the train, and Captain America said sadly, "Barnes is dead." "What? That's the one who did it. I'm going to kill him." Obviously, Robert is not the only one with Captain America, but the entire team is nearby. They are all expressing their anger, while Robert is thinking about another thing. You must know that Captain America was depressed for a period of time in the original Time and Space. His ability to come out was entirely due to Carter's persuasion. However, it is now well known that Carter and Captain America have broken up. So how can Captain get out of his sadness next? This is all HYDRA's fault. Not only are they hurting our loved ones, but they want to destroy the world. Captain, Dr. Zola has been captured. Now let's find out the location of their headquarters and I will destroy it. I think only in this way can James rest in peace. Robert's words were filled with indignation, and naturally he could only do the task of enlightening Captain America himself. After his reminder, Steve found his goal again. That is, to avenge Barnes, I mean our team together. Captain America stood up, and after Robert's reminder, he understood what to do next, and this was exactly what someone wanted to see. In the underground interrogation room, Philip personally interrogated Zola. "Drive Zola, I think you should know that you killed Captain America's friend. If I hand you over to him." "Zola, I can tell where the Red Skull is and what the plan is, but you have to keep me safe." Dr. Zola, who had not spoken a word for several hours after being captured, finally gave in front of Philip. As a scientist who was forced to join Hydra, he did not want to die yet, so the conditions he proposed were to save his own life. Philip, "Okay, I agree to your terms, so where is the headquarters of Hydra?" Dr. Zola was brought to London for interrogation, and Captain America, who was eager to know where the Hydra base was, also went to London. After Robert waited for news with the captain for a while, he was called out, saying that someone was looking for him. "I wonder who is looking for me." He had no acquaintances in London. If I remember correctly, Burns, who was his friend, was still fighting the enemy in Germany. Coming out of the base, Robert saw a familiar figure waiting at the door. I'm going to call the captain out." "Wait a minute, I'm not here to find him." The person coming was none other than Carter. She was still wearing the military uniform at this moment, and her slim figure was hidden underneath. However, Robert didn't have much desire to see her at this time. Instead, he was afraid that her appearance would affect his plan. "Let's go over there and talk." Since Carter was not looking for the captain, Robert knew that she should be looking for him. Although he didn't know what the situation was, he still cautiously took Carter aside in order to prevent the captain from meeting him by chance. "What are you afraid of?" Walking onto the streets of London, Carter looked directly into Robert's eyes and asked directly, "Why do you think so? What do I have to be afraid of?" Robert pretended to be relaxed, but in fact he was observing his surroundings, afraid of meeting any familiar people. However, his move that he thought would leave no trace was full of loopholes in the eyes of Carter, a professional. "I thought you would be a bold man, but it turns out you are no different from those people. So is it true that you said you liked me before?" Carter had clearly felt that Robert was avoiding her. She couldn't understand the reason, but she didn't want to understand it at the moment. "Well, I probably still like it." Robert's ambiguous answer stung Carter even more. Her mind couldn't help but think of the scene of Steve having an affair with that woman, and the unknown fire in her eyes immediately began to burn. "It seems that you just wanted to have fun before, so how about we play something bigger today?" It is said that women who are injured in love are irrational. This is the case with Carter now. She actually forced Robert to a hotel. Opening the room, going upstairs, and taking a shower in the bathroom were all completed within 10 minutes. Hearing the sound of running water in the bathroom just a few steps away, Robert finally came back to his senses. What does she want to do? Force herself on her? Perhaps it was Carter's behavior that was in line with Robert's subconscious that allowed her to drag him into a room. Now the two of them are in such an environment. There are no outsiders, and if nothing happens, the last operation can start tomorrow, and Robert and Steve will be frozen together for 70 years. After thinking about it in his mind, Robert felt that the time, location, and people were all taken care of, so what else was left to take into consideration? After Robert thought about this, he quickly took off his clothes and started walking towards the bathroom. Crack! The sound of the bathroom door being locked sounded, and Carter inside had calmed down now. Whether it was because of the shower or the sound of Robert's footsteps that made her flustered, maybe both. Robert, I have some thoughts that I haven't thought about. Can you give me some time? In the bathroom, Carter turned off the water valve. She tried to use words to redeem herself from the consequences of her impulse, but now that Robert had taken off his pants, he didn't care about that. I'm afraid this won't work, baby. Dang dang. The bathroom door lock was broken by his bare hands and fell to the ground, making a crisp sound. However, Robert did not look at the things on the ground, but fixed his eyes on the white rabbit in the bathroom who was holding his clothes and trying to cover himself. I promise I'll be gentle. When Robert was about to get close, Carter threw the clothes in her hand at his face, and then tried to subdue him with a sweep, but unfortunately her plan did not succeed. Since you want to play, let's have a good time. We have plenty of time. An hour later, Carter, who was made weak by Robert, finally gave up her resistance, and fell asleep after her last bit of strength turned into a cry. However, Robert was not going to let her go, because just now he came up with a good idea to prevent Carter from appearing in front of Steve tomorrow. The second day, Captain America. The intelligence came out. Zola said that Hydra's last base is near the pole, and there are nearly 3,000 enemy troops there. Robert, what's our next plan? Captain America. I'll go for a frontal assault first. If it fails, then we'll have to cooperate with you from inside and outside. General Philip will also lead 3 regiments to fight with us. Riding on a military transport plane, Robert and Captain America were sitting opposite each other. At this moment, he was holding a photo and looking at it carefully. Steve, hey Robert, have you seen Carter? I looked for her yesterday and this morning and she wasn't at her residence. I will tell you that she slept in my arms last night and couldn't bear the pain this morning. Although he was secretly happy about what happened last night, Robert remained silent on the surface. Agent Carter, I've never seen her. What's wrong? Captain America. Nothing, I just want to apologize to her. Then it won't be too late to apologize after this operation is completed. I think General Philip should give us a holiday after such a big mission is completed. Robert said with a nonchalant expression, implying that Captain America would have a lot of time after this operation. Captain America. That's right. More than a dozen transport planes landed at the airport closest to the Hydra base. Only some of these planes were from the United States and the rest were from its allies. Even though it was very close to the Hydra base, it still took 2 military trucks to get there. General Philip, I want to take my team in a jeep and set off first. We can inquire about some situations in front. Regarding Captain America's proposal, Philip did not return immediately but looked at him deeply, and then said with a hint of reminder. It's okay to inquire about the situation, but you have to promise not to act without authorization before our large force arrives. Although the original plan included a plan for you to go in and cooperate with the outside world, that is only if there is sufficient backup. I hope you understand. Captain America. Don't worry, sir, I won't lead my team to death. With that said, he started the jeep under Philip's gaze. Robert was about to follow, but Philip held him back. Boy, after this operation is over, you should rest for a while, follow me around, and let those old guys get to know you, so that your promotion to major will be sure. After speaking, Philip looked around and said in a voice that only 2 people could hear clearly. Your age for promotion to major is a big issue. After all, you are only 18 years old. There are almost no majors at this age in the United States, but don't worry, I won't stand idly by. Thank you, sir. I will work harder in the future and I will not let you down. Philip. Great. Then go ahead and keep an eye on the captain to prevent him from doing anything stupid. After patting him on the shoulder, Philip personally directed the soldiers to board the vehicle, but after all, it still took a few minutes for thousands of people to coordinate. Looking at Philip's busy back, Robert actually felt a little guilty, because he would be a deserter next, and he would be a deserter for 70 years. But there was no turning back when he fired his bow. Robert could only say sorry from the bottom of his heart and went to join Captain America. Captain America. Everyone is here, sit tight and let's set off. Outside the Hydra base, the defense here today is extremely strict. There are no less than 500 people defending the first level alone, and their final base is even bigger. It seems that Hydra hollowed out the entire mountain and built its base on this basis. The member of the team who had been responsible for the observation work came to a conclusion after a week of investigation. This result undoubtedly shocked everyone, and they all sighed inwardly at Hydra's generosity. Captain, they seem to have a command post on the top of the mountain, and if we use the ropeway, we can rush into their command room from the opposite mountain. Now, since Philip and his large force have not arrived yet, the team cannot fight in advance, so they simply serve as scouts and study the outside of Hydra's base. Captain America, where is that place? Take me to see it. When Steve checked the place mentioned by the team member, he immediately said that if he failed to break in alone later, the team would enter the Hydra base from here to coordinate the actions of the large force. Standing nearby, Robert felt powerless to complain. He really didn't understand why Team USA had to rush in first and then let his teammates save him. Why couldn't everyone rush in together and solve the problem quickly? Maybe this is the American idea of a personal hero. 15 minutes later, Philip arrived on time with 3 groups. Captain, please tell me the plan. I think you should have it after scouting for so long. Captain America. Yes, that's right. We plan to. Immediately after Captain America revealed his plan, it was a plan full of loopholes that even Robert could see, but Philip praised it greatly. It's perfect, let's take action, Captain. Riding on the motorcycle he borrowed from the airport just now, with some high explosives strapped to it, Captain America rode it headlong towards the Hydra base. Is this really possible? When Robert saw the American team rushing into the opponent's base in such a majestic manner, he didn't feel it when he watched the movie in his previous life, but now he feels awkward after experiencing it in person. In this regard, he concluded that this may be due to the difference in the way of thinking between Europeans and Asians in addition to heroism. Boom! With the sound of high explosives, the door of the Hydra base was successfully blown open, and a large number of Hydra soldiers who heard the sound also surrounded the captain. At first, the U.S. team could handle it, but as the number of enemies continued to increase, they were as dense as a swarm of locusts, and the U.S. team had no choice but to be controlled. Team members, please note that the leader has been captured. Plan B will be implemented immediately. Take action immediately when you reach the predetermined position on the top of the mountain. There is no doubt that the matter failed. After all, Captain America was just an enhanced human soldier, not an artificial god. He was helpless when faced with the siege of hundreds of people. I'll give you 10 minutes. In 10 minutes I will lead a force to attack. Philip reminded the team members after hearing Robert's words. Americans are always so arrogant. In the command room located on the top of the mountain, the Red Skull looked down at the American team being escorted up. He looked at Captain America carefully, as if he wanted to find something from him, but when he found nothing, he couldn't help but feel angry. I can't find anything different in you. Come and tell me yourself, what's different about you? The reason why I ask this is actually because the Red Skull is also an enhanced person, but due to his immature technology, he has flaws, such as his exposed head. I'm just a normal person, nothing different. Red Skull. HMPH. Captain America. Captain America's words undoubtedly stung the Red Skull. You must know that disfigurement has always been his heartache. Originally, Steve, as an enhanced person like him, was considered his kind, but this kind was so perfect, but he himself was there are so many flaws. Driven by jealousy, he punched Captain America several times. I can stay with you to the end. Even though he was bleeding, Steve still stared at the Red Skull stubbornly. However, the other party seemed to have no time to spend with him. I don't have time to play with you anymore. As he spoke, the Red Skull prepared to kill Steve with one shot. Puff, puff, puff. However, the sound outside the window interrupted him. Red Skull subconsciously looked out the window at the top of the mountain and saw 3 people sliding over using zip lines. Snort. While Red Skull was dazed, Captain America suddenly jumped up and broke free. Red Skull reacted and shot at Captain America, but he blocked it with the Hydra soldier beside him. Everything happened in a flash of lightning. Robert was the second group to enter the battlefield on the ropeway. At this time, Steve had just rushed out to chase the escaping Red Skull. At this time, Robert clearly knew that the opportunity he had been pursuing had arrived, so he did not dare to neglect and hurriedly followed him. The distance was not too close or too far, but he was just in a position where he could see Captain America. No matter how many Hydra soldiers blocked the way, he could easily deal with them. Suddenly, Robert saw that the American team in front was blocked by a soldier holding a flamethrower. Knowing that the time had come, Robert immediately stopped hiding and took out his pistol. The gun killed him. When Captain America turned around and realized that Robert had helped him, he nodded to him, and then chased after Hydra's back, as did Robert. Robert quietly caught up with Captain America. When he could see the Red Skull, he was already in a cave of huge amounts, and a large aircraft had already been parked here. That's the goal. Without hesitation, Robert rushed directly towards the plane. At this moment, the American troops who stormed in also arrived. When they arrived, the scene was immediately chaotic, and even the Red Skull's speed was slowed down a bit. And when Hydra was fighting with the US military, what they didn't notice was that a figure had quietly disappeared under the plane. Robert did not go up the stairs of the plane, which would be easily discovered. His current position was at the front landing gear of the plane, which happened to be a place that everyone easily overlooked. Long live Hydra. If you cut off one head, 2 new ones will grow. Death to the Nazis. The scene was chaotic for a while, but Robert was stuck in the large plane. It was ridiculous to say that there were many weapons on the scene, not to mention the explosives brought in by the US military, but the weapons made by the Tesseract in the hands of Hydra. In such a chaotic battlefield, with both sides still equipped with powerful weapons, such a large aircraft was not even damaged at all. If Robert hadn't been afraid of being exposed, he would have wanted to stick his head out to see whether it was Hydra that fought tooth and nail to protect the plane or the US military on the opposite side that released water to keep such a big guy safe. Red Skull, don't run. While Robert was thinking wildly, he suddenly felt the front wheels moving. He quickly found a suitable position to get his feet off the ground. As soon as he found the position, Captain America's voice rang in his ears. Not to mention whether the Red Skull can hear it, even if he is gifted and can hear the sounds outside clearly in the plane, he will not stop as long as he is not a fool. Seeing that Hydra was about to escape, Steve relied on 2 legs to catch up with the plane. This was obviously impossible. When the plane piloted by the Red Skull reached a very high speed, the US team had no choice but to give up the pursuit. Get in the car quickly. Philip was like a magic weapon descending from the sky at this time. He drove the Red Skull's car alone to the captain's side. Seeing that the car was barely catching up with the plane, Philip simply pressed the nitrogen acceleration button on the car. The speed immediately increased by a level, and Captain America also took this opportunity to jump on the rear landing gear. Ha! Squeak, squeak, squeak. With the harsh sound of brakes, Captain America always felt like something was missing, but he couldn't remember it and just didn't think about it. After taking one last look at the ground, he came to the inside of the aircraft as the landing gear rose. Hurry up! Robert also reached the interior of the aircraft as the nose landing gear was raised. He quickly poked his head out to look around and found the captain, who was also watching not far away. Captain America hadn't noticed him yet, and Robert was just about to say hello. Dang, dang, dang. The sound of leather shoes stepping on steel plates sounded, and 5 Hydra soldiers followed. Hey! Captain America immediately laid an ambush, and it wasn't until those people passed by that he suddenly rushed out and knocked down one of them. Hydra's soldiers were not slow to respond. They did not carry guns and weapons, so they simply took out daggers and attacked the sudden appearance of Captain America. Robert was watching the battle from the sidelines at this time. In fact, most of his attention was attracted by the giant bombs where the US team and the Hydra soldiers were fighting. With a cockpit attached to the bomb, is this Hydra's version of kamikaze? Robert couldn't help but feel stunned at this suicidal attack. At this time, the battle between Captain America and the soldiers was still continuing, and it was obvious that Hydra was completely at a disadvantage. Otherwise, he was someone who dared to drive a bomb to carry out a suicide attack. Seeing that his side was at a disadvantage, those Hydra soldiers simply ignored him and started the bombing process. Although the US team tried its best to stop it, a fish that slipped through the net successfully got into the bomb cockpit and finally flew out. As Captain America followed the bomb plane and flew out of here, Robert also poked his head out. His current position can be said to be excellent, because if the memory is correct, the captain will soon deal with the Hydra soldier driving the bomb. Then snatch the cockpit and fly back here, and all Robert needs to do is wait here and show up again when the captain comes. In fact, Robert can now definitely access the Tesseract, but there is one thing that can only be achieved if the captain takes him with him. Caca. Robert moved the elastic part of the landing gear away, and then he stretched his legs in. If it were an ordinary person, he would definitely not be able to move it, but Robert. Yawning, just when he suspected that he would fall asleep in the next second, Steve finally flew the bomb plane back here with a crackling sound. Steve, is that you? Seeing the protagonist in place, Robert also started his performance. Captain America had just finished dealing with the enemy and dodged the Red Skull's cannon. After finally boarding the plane again, he found that there seemed to be someone else. He put the shield in front of him and asked vigilantly, "Who is where? Come out. I am the captain, Robert." Robert. Captain America hurried over and found that it was really Robert, but now his foot was stuck in the middle of the landing gear and could not move. "Are you okay?" There was no doubt at all. The American team immediately went to lift the landing gear. Branch. Obviously, it was not easy for Captain America to lift this thing, but fortunately, he successfully lifted it and rescued Robert. Fortunately, there happens to be a piece of rubber material stuck in the middle, otherwise my leg might be ruined. Robert wiped the sweat from his head and said with a scarred look on his face, "It's okay, man, can you still walk?" "No problem, let's go find the Red Skull quickly. I seriously doubt he has a backup plan," Robert hurriedly urged. Obviously he didn't want anything to happen due to the intermediate reasons. Good. So Captain America and Robert ran towards the cab. The more they ran there, the speed of the two of them began to slow down, because it became surprisingly quiet along the way. Hydra should be hiding inside. Robert looked at the cab door with a crack open and whispered to Captain America. "Okay, here's the plan. I'll go in first to attract attention, and you'll come out after the fight starts and deliver the critical blow." Robert. "No problem." Captain America nodded, then carefully held up the shield and entered the cab. Robert also carefully observed through the unclosed gap. Entering the cab quietly, Captain America gradually approached the driver's seat, and suddenly he found that there was no one there at all. Ben. The sound of energy gathering sounded, and Steve quickly picked up his shield to block it. "You really don't want to give up, do you?" Captain America. "That's right." Immediately afterwards, the two began to fight. Robert was watching from outside the door. The two were evenly matched, but his attention was always on the blue light energy source in the center of the cab. "You think you can save the world by printing the stars and stripes on your chest? You're wrong, Captain. The future I see doesn't have a flag. Cap. That's not my future." As he spoke, he picked up the shield and gave Hydra a heavy blow, sending him flying and hitting the central energy source hard. Dang. The device was damaged, and the Tesseract flew out of the device and landed right at the feet of the Red Skull. "Look what you've done." He knew that he could not defeat Captain America at this time, so the ignorant Red Skull picked up the Tesseract without any scruples in an attempt to gain power from it. Dang. A blue beam of light shot straight into the sky, and an image in the vast universe appeared directly above the Red Skull on the plane. Robert, who had been standing aside, knew that the time had come. Bump. A gunshot rang out, and then a bullet hit the Red Skull's head. It was at this time that he was teleported to the unknown universe by the power of the Tesseract, where he did not know whether he would live or die. "No, Robert, don't touch that thing." Looking at the sudden disappearance of the Red Skull, Captain America immediately realized the danger of the Rubik's Cube, but at this time Robert rushed to the Red Skull after shooting and caught the Rubik's Cube just as it was about to hit the ground. Beep. Ability detected. Space power. One of the most powerful forces in the universe, capable of fabricating and changing any space. The user can make any target appear in any space where they want it to appear. Do you want to obtain the power of space? The moment Robert obtained the power of space, he felt different. He felt the nearly endless surging power in his body. He had a feeling that he could collapse the space and destroy everything just by thinking about it. Robert, Steve was a little confused watching from the side. He didn't understand that the Rubik's Cube obviously swallowed the Red Skull, but how could it be fine once it got into Robert's hands? Ah, ah, Captain America's shout made Robert wake up instantly, and he couldn't help but break out in a cold sweat. He quickly activated the power of space on the Rubik's Cube to make it shine again. However, unlike the Red Skull that seemed to be bitten, Robert could easily let go. The power on the surface of the Rubik's Cube had not yet completely dissipated. As soon as Robert threw it onto the floor of the plane, it melted the steel plate and fell down. Huh, what happened just now, Robert? Seeing that the Rubik's Cube was finally gone, Captain America put down the shield in his hand. His original plan was to immediately knock the Rubik's Cube out of Robert's hand to save him as soon as the situation went wrong. It's okay, Captain. I originally wanted to grab the thing and take it back to Howard for study, but I didn't expect it to be so dangerous. When I got it, I couldn't react in time. Captain America had no doubts about Robert's rhetoric. He even thought to himself, maybe it consumed a lot of energy when it was given to the Red Skull, which is why you didn't disappear directly like that. Yeah, good luck. Robert quickly wiped the cold sweat from his face as he spoke. Seeing this, Steve stepped forward and patted his shoulder to comfort him. The Red Skull is dead, we are fine, man. Hey, hee. Robert didn't say anything, just smiled. And of course he was not afraid because he was afraid of being swallowed by the power of the Rubik's Cube. Robert was afraid of something else, and that was the ability, space power, he had just acquired. The name of this ability sounds very powerful, but its actual ability is even more powerful. Let's just say that as long as Robert can hold it, he can display the ability to destroy stars with a snap of his fingers. But the premise is that his body must be able to bear it. Yes, when Robert obtained this power just now, he was so swollen that he even thought of dominating the earth. If the captain hadn't woken him up, he might not have tried it. However, the result of that can only be that Robert's body cannot withstand the vast and infinite power, and he will be directly exploded by it, leaving no trace behind. Robert was sitting there and was congratulating himself for not committing suicide when the captain in front brought him another good news. Captain America. Robert, I think, we may not be able to go back. When he said this, Steve seemed a little entangled, helpless, etc. Very good. Although he thought so in his heart, Robert's face was extremely serious. He stood up quickly and asked, "What's wrong, Captain? All the bombs carried on the plane have been activated, its landing gear is also broken, and it is traveling very fast. It is impossible for us to get back safely." As Steve looked at Robert, something suddenly occurred to him. That's right, there's a parachute bag there, let's go skydiving, Robert. How about you? The plane is at high speed and its target is New York. I can't let this thing full of bombs fly over. After saying that, he handed the parachute bag to Robert. No doubt he was preparing to fly the plane to meet his death. Robert took the parachute bag, and when Captain America turned around, he quickly drew his gun and shot the parachute bag. Bang! Obviously you can't be a hero alone, Robert said to Captain America, who turned around immediately. At this time, his face was full of smiles. Can he be unhappy when he wakes up and it is the 21st century? Robert, Captain America looked at his companions in shock. He saw that the only parachute bag was destroyed. He didn't know if there was any more on the plane, but so what? If Robert could break one, he could break the second one. Captain is destined to die in life. He may be heavier than a mountain, or he may be as light as a feather. I think it's worth dying for the millions of people in New York. I was a little impulsive just now. There should be a parachute on the plane to find. I'll fly the plane. Then Robert persuaded Captain America to come, but he knew Captain America's character and he would never abandon his teammates. Sure enough, the next second. Ha ha ha, as you said, none of us can be this hero alone. The open-mindedness of the dying man was also shown at this time. After reporting the situation to the U.S. military ground tower, the U.S. team directly destroyed the radio station. He sat in the driver's seat and piloted the plane to suicidally hit an iceberg at the extreme point, Superior. But even with such a crazy move, what he said was the most ordinary words, such as the first time he was embarrassed, the first time he was beaten, and as long as he was conscious, he would always stand up. Hey, Robert, do you know? When others bully you, you must not fall down, because as long as you fall down, they will continue to bully you, and you will lose the courage to stand up again. Ding. As soon as Steve finished speaking, Robert felt a tinnitus in his ears, and then he felt extremely cold and lost consciousness in just 2 or 3 seconds. Tony Stark, the heir and CEO of Stark Company, was confirmed to have disappeared in Afghanistan yesterday, which caused Stark Company's stock to plummet, falling by more than 10% as of the time of reporting. On the TV was a report by a female anchor, but sitting in front of the TV was a person who was supposed to have died in 1943. Tony, is he Howard's son? Putting down the wine glass, Robert said to himself in this large villa provided by the government. Now he is the only one in the whole villa, and if you want to ask how the villa came to be. Dingle bell, dingle bell. The phone rang. Robert picked up his long-lost smartphone, looked at the contact and answered directly. How about Burns? When will the $10 million subsidy you agreed to apply for me be received? Burns. Ahem. You are so good, I'm almost dead and you still have the heart to trouble me. The voice on the phone was old but still energetic. He was Burns, Robert's superior and one of his friends during World War II. It was already 70 years later in the 21st century. Perhaps it was the butterfly effect caused by Robert that led to the addition of General Burns in the United States. Now, 70 years later, the 23-year-old major is now a 93-year-old retired general. Robert was deeply touched by Burns' words. Burns had visited him when he first woke up. How could it not be sad that the once high-spirited young man had become an old man in the blink of an eye? It's okay if Burns has difficulties. In fact, I'm quite satisfied with the $100,000 monthly government subsidy you helped me get. Really, there's no need to force it. There was sudden silence on the other end of the phone. If it weren't for the heavy breathing, Robert would have thought he had fallen asleep. The long silence seemed to be to organize the words, and then Burns said, "Listen, Robert, you deserve it. If you and the captain had not disappeared in that operation, with your achievements, even if you have nothing if you don't do it, you just need to wait until you are old enough to become a major general. Do you think the major generals of the United States can't compare to a mere 10 million? His words were firm, but Robert was never worried about taking advantage of the government, but was worried about his good friend. I understand, but I think if you have to pay a lot for this, then don't bother. If it's because of me." Before Robert could finish speaking, Burns said on the other end of the phone. Ahem. I have always asked my son Dean to handle Robert's matter. He is now the colonel of the first column of the Air Force and his words still carry a lot of weight. Okay, thank you. How about I pay a visit to your house next week? Burns's attitude was so determined that Robert couldn't refuse any more, but he still wanted to come and thank him. It's not necessary, Robert, I am now. Hey, you know, when I see you, I will remember the past, but I can never go back. The meeting I look forward to most is this is the last time I see you before I die. Of course, if you encounter anything, you are welcome to come at any time. Doo-doo. The phone was hung up, and Robert lay down on the big soft sofa. All of this should be considered a gift from his former friend. From what Burns said at the end, he could tell that this friend didn't seem to want to see him much anymore, perhaps because he couldn't bear the fact that he was old. In fact, Robert has a way, which is the ability of the infinite stones. This is not the space stone that he has obtained the ability, but the time stone that represents time. However, not to mention that the thing is currently being kept by the Ancient One, the most powerful mage on Earth. Even if Robert wanted to, it would be difficult to find traces of the Ancient One, let alone the time stone that she cherishes as much as life. And, last time we met, he mentioned that there might be a way to extend Burns' life, but he rejected it without even thinking about it. Perhaps people will get tired of it after living for a long time. Putting on his coat, Robert picked up the keys to the Audi A6 on the table. Now he also wanted to relieve stress through indulgence. His villa is located in a suburb of New York City not too far from the city. It is a famous gathering place for rich and powerful people. The living service facilities are first class, but you can meet someone every 10 minutes. This is evident from the frequency of police patrol cars. Robert's life after waking up from the ice can be described as comfortable, but Captain America, who had the same experience as him, was a bit miserable. Because of his identity as an enhanced human soldier, Nick Fury, director of S.H.I.E.L.D., took notice and wanted him to join the imaginary Avengers team. Although Robert had an astonishing performance in World War II, he had never been strengthened and had no one to support him, so S.H.I.E.L.D. naturally didn't have much interest in him. In fact, Captain America also has the opportunity to be cool, but compared to Robert, he is obviously more selfless. He would rather stay in S.H.I.E.L.D. just because of Fury's words of protecting all mankind. Alas, driving on the highway near the city, because Robert's car had military plates, no police dared to stop him for questioning. He was always driving at the top speed, and even if he occasionally exceeded the speed limit, he would turn a blind eye. Just let it go. Robert. This feels great. In the noisy bar, Robert had just sat down when someone came up to chat with him. Perhaps they valued his appearance. After all, he was a man who had taken Carter's first blood. If he was ugly, would people like him? Does that Audi at the door of the handsome guy belong to you? As soon as this woman spoke out her words, Robert knew that this was obviously the second type, and he felt indifferent instantly. Even if she looked at it, it was okay. If 10 is a perfect score, compared to a normal person's 5 points, the woman in front of him could be seen under the light. 6.5. This has to be the premise that she has not taken off her makeup. If she has taken off her makeup, it will be difficult to tell. No, that's not my car. I just rented it this morning. Do you want to take a ride? Robert's seemingly inviting words fell on the woman's ears, but she was instantly indifferent to him. She rolled her eyes and left with a shake of her butt. TCH, it turns out it's a money man. As the woman walked, Robert could even hear her complaining about him clearly from behind, and he couldn't help but feel sad for a moment. Can't I just rely on my looks to get hit on? Do they only have dirty money in their eyes? Robert poured a swig of wine into his mouth, and he sat here for half an hour. There were hundreds of people in the huge bar, but no one came to talk to him. Hey, it seems this is not a good place to find an affair. After taking the last sip of wine, Robert settled the bill and prepared to go home indifferently. When he opened the car door and started the car, he realized that it was still early. How about just driving around and pretending to be familiar with the terrain anyway? Putting the forward gear on, Robert stepped on the accelerator and left the parking space. Even after drinking just now, he could maintain a sense of balance that was difficult for ordinary people to achieve. As for the little alcohol, it could not affect his sanity at all. Brooklyn. The road sign ahead showed the place he was about to enter. Robert felt inexplicably that the name was familiar, but he couldn't remember where he had heard it. I found that a strange Audi is about to drive into our territory. Have you confirmed his license plate? Are you sure you haven't seen it before? Don't worry, I've never seen the license plate on that Audi. I guess it's probably from a rich second-generation deck looking for excitement. Then let's have a vote. Dry. The 6th Street in Brooklyn is where gangs are most rampant. At least one criminal incident occurs almost every night. It can be said to be a restricted area for most people. But Robert drove here openly in the middle of the night, and immediately made Anna, the biggest gangster here, unable to help but attack him. I wonder why this place is so quiet. Robert, who was unaware that he had entered a dangerous zone in the car, was still driving leisurely, and the speed did not exceed 30 miles. When he drove into a narrow road, 2 cars suddenly sprang out from both sides, blocking Robert's way. Get off the bus. Get off the bus quickly. A group of robbers wearing masks and holding weapons rushed over immediately. They shouted and smashed the car windows with their weapons. Oh, I was wondering why the name Brooklyn seems so familiar, so it's like this. Robert looked at the group of masked gangsters outside and immediately remembered, isn't this Brooklyn a famous gang gathering place? I heard that even the patrol police won't come here at night. Oh, interesting. The blue light flashed in Robert's hand, and he suddenly realized that his new ability seemed to have not been used yet and he was consecrating it today. Boy, you better get out of here. Apparently the people outside had lost their patience. They stopped beating with cold weapons and directly took out their pistols to threaten. Worried that his new car would be damaged, Robert quickly got out of the car to check, but his hurried movements made the gang members think he was scared. Boss, look at how scared this white-skinned pig is. Ha ha ha, yes, be obedient, now squat down with your head in your hands. Robert ignored these two people and turned around to check his own glass, not to mention that he actually found a flaw. Hey guys, do you know that you broke my car window? Now you should prepare compensation for it. What did you say? Obviously Robert's words confused these people, but they turned to look at the 8 companions on their side and realized that everyone had weapons. I wonder if you don't realize what's happening now. You don't want to go to court with me, do you? Then I have to tell you that New York City's laws are not feasible here. A gang member with a hot temper wanted to intimidate Robert when he saw him being so calm. What he didn't expect was that a blue light suddenly appeared from the other man's hand and swallowed one of his hands instantly. What happened? Where's your hand, Kemi? Kemi. I don't know. It's him. He must have shot. Shoot. The leader of the group picked up a pistol and shot at Robert. When the other boys saw this, they also imitated those who had guns and shot him with their guns. Those who didn't have guns directly picked up the guy and attacked him at close range. Snort. The moment before the bullet came, a blue light curtain appeared in front of Robert, blocking him tightly. Immediately afterwards, those gang members who rushed over with inertia before they had time to react would be sucked in wherever they touched the light curtain, whether it was weapons or hands. It feels like putting your hand into water, but this kind of water can only go in but not out. What is this? Let us out. The first 2 people rushed directly into the light curtain, and the other 2 stopped, but one of them still got half of his body in. It's boring. Robert. For an opponent of this level, the new ability is not used very much and the opponent is useless. He was too lazy to fight with these fools anymore, so he just closed the space barrier and wanted to rely on more familiar power to solve it. Forehead. Unexpectedly, he had just stopped the ability to transport the space barrier and disappeared directly, and a corpse with only half of his body appeared directly in front of him. Ghost. Run. It was the first time for Robert, who was involved in this situation, to see it. He really didn't know what would happen. If he had known in advance that it would be so dirty, he would definitely not have used this trick. Dodging the splatter of blood, Robert turned around to catch the frightened gang members. Bang bang bang. There were several sounds of landing, and Robert kicked the remaining people to a place where they piled together. You smashed my car and just want to leave like this. The remaining 4 people were kicked until they fell to the ground half dead. Now they were lying like dead fish. It was not until they heard Robert's words that they felt a glimmer of hope. Of course not. Sir, we are willing to compensate. I have about 700,000 yuan in this card and will give it all to you. Robert took the bank card and raised his eyebrows. He obviously didn't expect that a gang member would have so much money. Seemingly seeing the confusion on Robert's face, the man hurriedly explained, the money comes from transactions. It was supposed to be given to my boss at the end of this month. Now it's all given to you. Just let me go. Quote. Then what will you do if I take the money away? You don't want to go back to your boss to kill me, do you? As he spoke, in order to heighten the terrifying atmosphere, Robert teleported directly to the several corpses he had just killed, including the half he just killed, and directly teleported the corpses to an unknown space. It might still be the Earth, but more what is possible is the vastness of space. It's okay, sir. I have money to fill this hole. Obviously Robert's threats were very effective. The 4 people kneeling in front of him were frightened to death. Fear of the unknown is human instinct. At the moment, the leader of the group didn't bother to care about it. He directly told him that he still had money. However, as soon as he finished speaking, Robert raised his hand in front of him, and his meaning was obvious. Ding. The transfer amounted to 430,000 United States dollars. The man looked at Robert cautiously. He wanted to slap himself now, and secretly wondered why he was so obsessed with provoking such a plague god, and now his younger brother lost his life and all his wealth and got involved. But after all, there is no regret medicine in the world. Now this old black man just wants to save his life. He is afraid that Robert will be dissatisfied, so he explains. Sir, I still have some fixed assets. Just give me a few days and I can raise another $500,000. Robert. Really? Aha. It's a pity that I don't want to go to such trouble. As soon as the words fell, the 4 people kneeling on the ground were directly surrounded by a ball of blue space energy. In their shocked eyes, the power of space appeared and these people were directly teleported to an unknown distance. Robert didn't feel anything at all about the few people he killed casually. After all, he was now in the evil United States, which was a country that advocated extreme selfishness. If I use the power of space at the same intensity just now, I can use it for 5 consecutive days with my current physical strength. Then I must rest after that, otherwise an accident is very likely to occur. He made a preliminary prediction of his own strength in his mind. The strength mentioned here is what he can currently display. In fact, with the energy currently contained in his body, it is possible to destroy most of the universe, but the premise is that Robert can withstand the process of energy gathering. Sitting back in the car, Robert felt that those ideas were unrealistic. If he wasn't Thanos, why would he destroy half of the world? Let's talk about practical issues. Robert turned the bank card in his hand and found a nearby bank to complete the transfer procedures. As the $690,000 arrived, Robert suddenly had an immature idea. What happened in Paul's territory? What happened with the gunfire just now? Dead-end gang leader Charles John asked his henchman on the side. Are you going crazy after taking too much? I'll call and ask right now. Do. There was a busy tone on the phone, and after John's confidant tried calling 3 times but no one answered, John suddenly interrupted him. Something is wrong. I once personally said that there is a phone that must be kept open, but now you have called 3 times and he didn't answer. What does it mean? Are they in trouble? Seeing John nod slightly and then shake his head, his confidant couldn't help but boldly guessed, could they have rebelled? John, we have to go and have a look no matter what. That guy still has this month's pink money in his hand that he hasn't paid yet. Following the order from the leader of the Dead Game Gang, more than a dozen vans drove out from the Dead Game Gang headquarters, with nearly 100 people in them. I hope everyone will support it and subscribe more.